Among the concealed corners of human history lie libraries that the world was never meant to see, their existence whispered only in rumour and the fragile edges of ancient manuscripts. Some rest beneath monastic walls carved from stone, their corridors heavy with the scent of incense and candle wax, while others are buried beneath desert sands, sealed by those who feared the power of their knowledge. In these forgotten archives, the accumulated wisdom of empires, religions and lost civilizations waits silently. Texts on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and secrets that might reshape our understanding of the past. As the hidden histories unfold before your eyes, the monasteries, fortresses and desert homes reveal how families, priests and scholars safeguarded their treasures from conquerors, fire and oblivion. Each hidden library tells a story of devotion, survival and mystery, and through its preserved pages, we step into worlds that history almost forgot. The Desert Hoard of Manuscripts at Dunhuang Library Cave. Among the shifting sands of China's Gansu province, on the western edge of the old Silk Road, there lies a stretch of desert that once served as the threshold between civilization and oblivion. It was here, at the foot of the Mingsha Mountains near the oasis town of Dunhuang, that a Buddhist monk named Wang Yuanlu stumbled upon a sealed doorway in 1900, a narrow aperture half buried in centuries of dust, leading to a chamber no one had entered in almost 1,000 years. What he found inside would soon become one of the greatest archaeological enigmas in human history. Tens of thousands of manuscripts, paintings and scrolls, preserved in silence and secrecy since the age of the Tang dynasty. The chamber, now known as the Library Cave of Magao, was not large, scarcely more than a small shrine carved into sandstone, yet its contents spoke of an empire's reach and the restless movement of belief. Rolls of silk and paper lay stacked from floor to ceiling, wrapped in faded cloth, their edges brittle with time. There were sutras written in Sanskrit, Tibetan, Sogdian, and even Hebrew, alongside administrative records, music scores and fragments of lost literature. The air inside was dry, motionless, almost sacred in its stillness. No one could yet explain who had gathered these texts, or why such a vast repository of knowledge had been sealed away behind a wall of plaster and left to be forgotten by history. At the dawn of the 20th century, the discovery ignited a quiet competition among scholars and explorers who crossed the desert under the pretext of research, but were driven by the allure of possession. When British-Hungarian explorer Aurel Stein arrived in 1907, he found Wang Yuanlu still guarding the cave, uncertain of its importance and desperate for funds to maintain the surrounding temples. For a modest donation, Stein was permitted to take away thousands of manuscripts, including a text later identified as the Diamond Sutra, the world's oldest printed book bearing an exact date, 868 CE. Not long after, French sinologist Paul Pelliot followed, selecting with more care and fluency those pieces he deemed most valuable, among them texts that revealed forgotten kingdoms and religious dialogues that bridged East and West. The manuscripts were scattered across continents, to London, Paris, St. Petersburg and Tokyo, but the heart of the mystery remained buried in the desert that had hidden them for centuries. Why had so many documents, religious and secular alike, been sealed away? One theory suggested fear, that monks, anticipating an invasion by the Tangut or Mongol armies, concealed their most sacred writings to preserve them from desecration. Others believed it to be ritual, a deliberate act of sanctification, retiring damaged or outdated texts as offerings rather than discarding them. Yet the evidence never quite fit either explanation. The sealing of the cave seemed too deliberate, too complete, as if the intention was not merely to protect the manuscripts but to erase their existence altogether. The Magao caves themselves had long been a spiritual crossroads, their walls covered in vivid murals of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, merchants and pilgrims, a painted record of centuries when caravans from India, Persia and Byzantium passed through Dunhuang on their way to the heart of China. Each wall depicted not just devotion but exchange, showing how ideas travelled as surely as goods. In that sense, the library cave was more than an archive, it was a fossilised memory of a world in motion. Inside those rolled scrolls lay the faint handwriting of monks, traders and travellers, whose cultures mingled for a brief moment before fading into the dust. Modern scholars, equipped with ultraviolet light and multispectral imaging, continue to decipher the faded ink of those ancient scrolls. Among the texts are rare translations of lost Buddhist sutras, fragments of Taoist ritual manuals, and even official decrees that reveal the bureaucratic machinery of the Tang Empire at its height. Some fragments describe celestial events, eclipses, and comets, noted with the same care as prayer formulas, suggesting that those who recorded them saw no boundary between the divine and the observable world. Others contain songs and ballads written in vernacular Chinese, hinting at the voice of common people whose words would otherwise never have survived. The manuscripts offer a glimpse into the rhythms of life along the Silk Road: trade, devotion, diplomacy, all preserved in the dry breath of the desert. And yet the most haunting detail is that the cave's concealment seems to have succeeded perfectly. For nearly a millennium, no traveller or pilgrim appears to have known it was there. The outer wall that sealed the chamber was painted to match the rest of the temple, blending seamlessly with the centuries of mural restoration around it. It was only by chance that Wang Yuanlu, while sweeping sand from a damaged statue, noticed a faint line in the plaster where the wall met the floor. Had his broom passed an inch higher, the chamber might still lie undiscovered today. The silence that kept those scrolls intact for so long now clings to their meaning, an unanswered question about what or whom the library was meant to protect. The dispersal of the manuscripts across institutions has made the puzzle harder to solve. The international Dunhuang project, formed in the 1990s, has begun digitally reuniting the scattered fragments, allowing researchers to reconstruct entire scrolls from pieces housed thousands of miles apart. Patterns have begun to emerge, clues suggesting that the library's contents were assembled over centuries, evolving from a working monastic archive into a spiritual time capsule. Still, no inscription or record has yet been found to name the one who ordered the cave sealed, or to explain the precise moment it happened. The absence itself has become part of the story, a blank space historians continue to interpret as if it were a text. Visitors who stand today at the entrance of Cave 17, the so-called Library Cave, often describe an odd stillness, a sense that the air holds something more than dust. The murals, though faded, seem to shimmer in the low light, and the hollow where the manuscripts once lay is now an empty alcove behind protective glass. The desert outside remains unchanged, wind moving softly across dunes, the faint glimmer of the Crescent Lake oasis beyond. It is easy to imagine that somewhere beneath the sand other sealed chambers remain undiscovered, their contents untouched, their silence unbroken. The Dunhuang Library Cave remains a miracle of preservation and a monument to forgetting, where knowledge still breathes beneath centuries of silence, whispering through the dust as if memory itself refused to die. The subterranean vault of Ivan IV, Vasilievich, the Terrible's lost library. Beneath the foundations of Moscow's oldest towers, where air hangs heavy with dust and rumour, some corridors lead nowhere, and others that no one dares to follow. Deep under the Kremlin, past layers of stone and iron, stories have long whispered of a hidden vault, a library so vast and secret that even time itself has failed to uncover it. They say that Ivan Vasilievich, remembered in history as Ivan the Terrible, gathered in those tunnels the lost knowledge of fallen empires, Byzantine codices, Greek philosophical treatises, and Latin manuscripts brought from Constantinople before its fall. The vault was said to have been sealed long before his death, and none who entered ever returned with proof of its existence. In the reign of Ivan Vasilievich, knowledge was not merely gathered, it was guarded, sealed, and feared. His court was filled with translators, astrologers, and clerics who handled foreign texts that spoke of medicine, warfare, and prophecy. Among the items rumoured to have reached Moscow were manuscripts once kept in the libraries of Mount Athos and Trebizond, relics of orthodox scholarship that vanished after the Ottoman conquests. The Tsar's appetite for ancient wisdom was insatiable. He ordered manuscripts from conquered lands and demanded that captured scholars interpret what his priests could not. Some accounts claim that after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a portion of the Byzantine Imperial Library was smuggled north, offered as tribute to Moscow's rising power. If true, those books would have carried the memory of Greece, Rome, and Byzantium, a treasure that could alter how history itself was understood. The legend of his hidden library first appeared in the whispers of foreign envoys, men who claimed to have seen walls lined with volumes bound in unfamiliar script, stacked beside bronze globes and astrolabes that no Russian craftsman had ever made. In 1570, an English diplomat named Giles Fletcher wrote of a Libria said to lie within the Kremlin's lower halls, guarded by men who answered only to the Tsar. Later chroniclers, both Russian and European, repeated the story, though none could say precisely where the vault lay. Some placed it beneath the Assumption Cathedral, others believed it was hidden within the Tsar's private chapel, reachable only through a concealed stair carved into the bedrock. The details never aligned, but the myth persisted, as enduring as the walls that surrounded it. As centuries passed, the search for those lost chambers became an obsession that consumed architects, scholars, and soldiers alike. In the 17th century, Tsar Boris Godunov ordered the first official excavation beneath the Kremlin, hoping to locate the fabled collection. The workers uncovered ancient tunnels and cellars, but no books, no vault, no trace of what legend promised. A century later, Peter the Great commissioned another search after reading reports of the Liberia in European correspondence. Again, only hollow corridors and sealed stone were found, though some said the air in certain tunnels felt wrong, thicker, as though concealing something behind it. By the 19th century, the mystery had grown to the scale of national folklore, with tales of workmen vanishing during nighttime excavations and hollow sounds echoing beneath their feet. The Kremlin's underbelly, a lattice of ancient tunnels and crypts, seems designed to breed speculation. Some corridors trace back to the foundations of the original wooden fortress built in the 12th century. Others were added during Ivan's reign to connect chapels, treasuries and armories. Archaeologists have documented sealed arches and brick doorways that lead into solid earth, their purpose lost to time. Beneath the Arsenal Tower, early Soviet engineers recorded readings of unusual magnetic distortion, leading some researchers to suspect the presence of sealed metallic structures buried deeper than any documented chamber. During restoration work in the 1960s, a forgotten passage was discovered beneath the Annunciation Cathedral, descending toward the river before ending abruptly at a wall of mortar and granite. No official explanation followed, though workers claimed the stone was of an unfamiliar type, not native to Moscow's bedrock. The silence surrounding the find only deepened the legend's hold. Historians have long debated whether the library perished in a fire or still lies intact behind walls no one has yet breached. Some point to the great conflagrations that swept Moscow in 1571 and again in 1626, suggesting that if such a collection ever existed, it would have been reduced to ash. Others argue that Ivan, mistrusting his heirs and fearing the misuse of forbidden knowledge, ordered the vault sealed by masons sworn to secrecy. Certain chroniclers even claimed the vault was cursed, that opening it would unleash divine wrath upon those who disturbed its sanctity. The line between record and superstition has blurred so completely that scholars now tread the same uncertain ground as the legends they once dismissed. Even in the age of satellites and scanners, the earth beneath Moscow continues to guard its secrets. In the early 1990s, a joint Russian-German expedition used ground-penetrating radar beneath the Kremlin complex. The scans revealed anomalies, voids and cavities consistent with man-made chambers, but permission to excavate was denied. Officially, no one knows what lies below. Unofficially, many believe the government already does. Those who have studied the maps of the old fortress note that certain corridors marked in early plans have since vanished from public records. Some suggest they were filled during Stalin's fortification works, others whisper they remain sealed under layers of concrete and bureaucracy alike. Perhaps the greater mystery is not the library itself, but the way a nation's memory clings to what it cannot prove. The myth of Ivan's vault has endured through revolution, war, and reconstruction, surviving even when archives burned and dynasties fell. It has become a mirror reflecting Russia's uneasy relationship with its past, a history of secrecy, loss, and unending search for hidden power. Historians speak of evidence and probability, but the story persists because it belongs as much to imagination as to fact. It is a reminder that knowledge, once desired and withheld, never truly disappears. It merely waits for those who dare to look beneath the surface. Somewhere in the chill below Red Square, stone meets silence, and silence, perhaps, has always known the truth. The secret manuscript house of Timbuktu. The families of Timbuktu hid them in cupboards, behind false walls, under beds no one thought to search. Manuscripts treated not as relics but as living prayers entrusted to lineages of scholars, scribes, and traders who taught their children the exact corner of a room where a bundle should be slid and the precise phrase to whisper before lifting a lid. When a stranger knocked, when a caravan passed bearing news of conquest or fire, the hands that had copied Quranic commentaries and treatises on astronomy moved otherwise. Bindings were wrapped in oilcloth, scrolls were rolled and stowed in clay jars, and entire shelves were dismantled and carried into courtyards where goat-shed earth could conceal them for the season. These households were not passive repositories, they were active guardianship networks, where knowledge was tended with the same ritual attention given to prayer, mended, copied, and catalogued by memory when ink or cloth had been eaten by time. Long before the world remembered Timbuktu as a myth half buried in travellers' tales, the city had become a sanctuary for words carried across the Sahara on the backs of camels and in the minds of itinerant scholars. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Sankore, Jinguereba, and the Mosque of Sidi Yahya drew students from Fez, Cairo, and Andalusia, creating an intellectual map tied more to parchment than to bounded borders. Merchants trading gold and salt brought with them not only wealth but books, and the trans-Saharan routes functioned as arteries through which legal opinions, astronomical tables, and medical recipes flowed into West Africa. Collections assembled in Timbuktu show ties to North African and Andalusian schools, and some manuscripts preserve commentaries and copies of works that no longer survive elsewhere. The city's libraries, private and institutional, were therefore not isolated curiosities but integral parts of a broader Islamic scholarly world, linked through correspondence, pilgrimage, and the exchange of teachers. Each family guarded a portion of the city's memory, copying pages by lamplight when the air was still and the streets outside were empty, and the tradition of private libraries became an inheritance as tangible as land or cattle. Many of these families could point to direct descent from scholars such as Ahmad Baba al-Tamimi, whose own collection and intellectual legacy became emblematic of Timbuktu's learning. Over generations, lineages accumulated marginalia, glosses, and local jurisprudence that gave their copies unique value, turning simple books into communal memory banks. Binding techniques, calligraphic styles, and the use of local materials bound these manuscripts to household practice. Leather repaired with animal hide, pages sewn with twisted fibre, titles noted in the margins for the next reader. Small, human acts that ensured continuity when institutions failed. When conquerors came, Moroccan armies in the late 16th century, French colonial administrators centuries later, and in recent years armed militants and looters, the manuscripts vanished into ordinary walls as though the city itself swallowed them, and yet the method of survival was not always secrecy alone, but the willingness to move texts as quickly as breath. The Moroccan invasion of 1591, followed by political fragmentation, scattered many collections. Later, the colonial period saw manuscripts taken to Timbuktu's new custodians and archives in Bamako, while the 20th and 21st centuries introduced fresh dangers ranging from climate-induced decay to targeted cultural destruction. Each era required a different strategy: concealment under matting, the division of collections so that no single house retained everything, or covert shipment along the Niger when cities fell silent. Those choices have left a fractal pattern of survival and loss that still confounds cataloguers. Some of those rooms have since been found, the air within thick with dust and time, pages curled but legible, the ink still holding its shape like dried river lines that bind a once-flowing current into a new channel. Libraries such as the Ahmed Babi Institute and the privately maintained Mama Haidara Library represent both recovery and incompleteness. Conservators now conserve works on mathematics, medicine, and jurisprudence that scholars in earlier centuries copied from Maghrebi exemplars, and many recovered folios show the hand of West African scribes annotating foreign treatments to local conditions. Fieldwork has revealed hiding places behind burnt beams, manuscripts tucked under floorboards, and catalogue entries that match fragments found in private homes, evidence that what was hidden often survived precisely because ordinary domestic spaces became extraordinary vaults. Scholars who studied these manuscripts after their rediscovery uncovered something unexpected: evidence that Timbuktu's libraries had once formed part of an organised intellectual network reaching across West Africa. Catalogues from the 16th century reference lending systems, joint copying projects, and shared commentary traditions that linked Timbuktu with the cities of Djenné, Gao, and Walata. Some manuscripts bear seals or marginal notations tracing ownership from family to family, suggesting that these texts circulated like letters rather than static possessions. The discovery of mathematical treatises written in Ajami script, African languages transcribed in Arabic characters, has also revealed that local scholars were not merely preserving foreign knowledge, but actively expanding it, adapting geometry, astronomy, and law to the Sahel's rhythms of trade and agriculture. What had once been dismissed as an isolated outpost now appears as a luminous node in a vast forgotten constellation of learning. In the 21st century, the same secrecy that once ensured their survival became their shield again, as librarians and community members moved entire collections under war's pressure in operations both organised and improvised. In 2012, when Islamist militants threatened Timbuktu's shrines and libraries, Abdelkader Haidara and his network orchestrated a clandestine evacuation that spirited more than 350,000 manuscripts downriver to Bamako, packed within metal trunks and rice sacks, carried by boat and donkey until they lay beyond the reach of fire and ideology. That rescue was neither spectacle nor simple logistics, but an act of cultural defiance. Curators, students, and ordinary citizens risked arrest, violence, and the loss of life to keep pages from being burned in a campaign that sought to erase the plurality of thought. The manuscript's flight was therefore two things at once: a physical movement of objects and a moral statement that words, even when hidden, could not be wholly silenced. Yet beneath the city's silence, the greatest question remains. How many houses still keep their secrets pressed between paper and sand, untouched even by the hands that saved them? And how many pages will never be catalogued because their custodians took their knowledge to the grave? The monastic archive sealed at Sakya Monastery, Tibet. There were stories, told in low voices among the travellers who crossed the passes, of a library no one had seen and yet everyone feared to forget. The tales began among merchants who followed the salt and wool routes from Nepal to Shigatse, and among monks who carried their texts through snow and silence. They spoke of a collection hidden not from enemies but from time itself, a library sealed by faith rather than secrecy. Some said that when the wind shifted across the high valleys, faint echoes of chanting rose from beneath the ground, as though the words themselves refused to fade. In those retellings, the unseen library was never simply a room of manuscripts. It was a vessel of continuity, a heart still beating under stone. Only later did those stories converge upon a single place, a monastery built of stone and silence, its corridors heavy with the scent of butter lamps and time. Sakya stands where the rivers of southern Tibet narrow to a whisper, its walls painted in bands of red, white and grey, colours said to represent wisdom, compassion and strength. The surrounding valley is dry and severe, ringed by hills that fold like sleeping animals, their shadows shifting with the sun. In that isolation, the monastery became both fortress and archive, a place where time slowed and the world's noise thinned to a single note of prayer. Even now, the air tastes faintly of soot and incense, and the walls seem to breathe with centuries of unbroken vigil. Founded in the 13th century under the patronage of Mongol rulers, Sakya became both a fortress of faith and a treasury of knowledge. Its rise coincided with the rule of Kublai Khan, whose court sought legitimacy through Tibetan Buddhism. Sakya Pandita, the scholar who first brought Tibetan learning to the Mongol elite, and his nephew Phagpa, who later became imperial preceptor to Kublai himself, filled the monastery's halls with thousands of texts copied from India, Nepal and China. These were not mere devotional works. They included treatises on medicine, mathematics, astronomy and philosophy, knowledge gathered across empires and languages. At its height, Sakya was said to hold over 80,000 scrolls, preserved in wooden boxes sealed with wax and wrapped in silk. The rooms that held them were vast and dim, lit only by butter lamps whose smoke blackened the beams until they gleamed like lacquer. When war crept across the plateau centuries later, the monks gathered their scrolls, not to burn nor to flee, but to entomb them beneath the stone floors. Tibet's shifting dynasties had brought unrest, and armies often looted monasteries for gold and relics. Yet the monks of Sakya believed their greatest treasure could not be measured in weight or form. They carried the manuscripts into lower halls and sealed them behind walls layered with clay and brick, a ritual burial carried out in silence as sutras were recited to sanctify the act. No single record describes precisely when this happened. Some claim it was during the collapse of Mongol authority, others that it occurred in the chaos of later invasions from Nepal and China, but all agree that once sealed, the doors were never opened again. To those who built them, the archives were not hidden. They were consecrated, placed beyond reach until the world grew worthy to read them again. Centuries passed before the sealed chambers were rediscovered, their entrance disguised within a wall thick enough to have withstood earthquakes. In 2003, monks conducting restoration work at Sakya uncovered a bricked archway beneath the main assembly hall. Behind it lay a chamber filled with boxes stacked from floor to ceiling, untouched since the 13th century. Teams from the Tibetan Academy of Social Sciences were summoned to assist, and scholars documented more than 84,000 manuscripts, the largest monastic archive ever found in Tibet. The air inside was cool and dry, the smell faintly metallic, as if the room had not drawn breath for centuries. Among the discoveries were palm leaf texts from India, imperial decrees from the Yuan dynasty, and hand-painted thankas rolled so tightly that their pigments still shimmered when uncoiled. Yet as soon as the first catalogues began, excavation was quietly halted. Officials cited structural instability, but rumours spread that the monks feared disturbing what had been sealed in sacred order. Even now, large portions of the vault remain closed. The scrolls remain astonishingly intact, ink unfaded, silk bindings supple, as if the air within had never known decay. The secret of their preservation lies partly in Sakya's high-altitude dryness, where humidity rarely stirs and temperatures remain steady through the year. Some attribute it to the materials themselves, the paper made from the inner bark of Himalayan mulberry, ink compounded from soot and yak butter, silk sealed with natural resin that repelled insects and rot. Others believe something less tangible guards them, that prayers once spoken over the ceiling still resonate within the walls, a vibration that kept destruction at bay. When conservationists examined a few recovered volumes under a microscope, they found microscopic salt crystals embedded in the fibres, remnants, perhaps, of the soil used in the ritual plaster. No one can yet explain how so much organic material could have survived 7 centuries nearly unchanged. The monastery's current abbot refuses further excavation, saying the knowledge below must rest until its time returns. What makes Sakya's archive unlike any other in Tibet is not its scale, but its silence. Beneath the chant and clatter of the living monastery, those buried rooms persist in complete stillness. A stillness scholars describe as almost physical, pressing against the chest of anyone who enters. It is said the monks who sealed them believed words possess breath, and that too much human intrusion might choke the spirit of the text itself. In this belief lies a philosophy of preservation unlike any library known to the modern world. Not to display, not to classify, but to let knowledge endure by denying it exposure. Even now, the rooms remain half-mapped, their true depth uncertain, for every attempt to survey them with radar has been quietly abandoned after signs of resistance in the readings, as though the stone refused to yield its shape. It is said that if the vaults were open, the dust itself would remember what the living have long forgotten. The forgotten scholarly stacks of a desert fortress. The priests of Qasr al-Gwaita came not as conquerors but as watchers of the wind, men who read the desert as others read scripture. Their journey led them to the edges of Egypt's western desert, where the sand stretched like a pale sea and silence seemed older than speech itself. These were scholars, monks, and record keepers, descendants of the intellectual currents that once flowed through Thebes and Alexandria. They sought refuge from the political storms of their age, carrying scrolls and codices wrapped in cloth and waxed leather, seeking a place where their learning might survive untouched by fire or decree. To them, knowledge was not possession but devotion, something to be kept alive through repetition, prayer, and secrecy. Far beyond the Nile's reach, the fortress of Qasr al-Gwaita rises from the rock like a sentence carved against forgetting. Built of mudbrick and sandstone, its form has withstood 2 millennia of wind that strips everything else to bone. Archaeologists have traced its origins to the 3rd century BCE, when the Ptolemies erected it as a temple dedicated to Amun and Mut, the gods who are believed to guard the oases. The site commanded the caravan route known as Darb el-Arba, a trade artery that once connected Sudan to Egypt and carried spices, salt, ivory, and news. But after the empire's decline, the fortress became a haven for those who feared that the written word would vanish under conquest, a belief that would give the place its second life. Within its sun-stripped corridors, rooms once served not only for prayer and refuge, but for the slow work of transcription. Fragments of papyrus discovered in the inner chambers bear faint traces of Greek, Demotic, and early Coptic script, evidence of a multilingual archive where texts of trade, astronomy, and devotion were copied by lamplight. Archaeologists from Cairo and Strasbourg in the early 20th century uncovered shallow niches in the walls, their soot-darkened interiors suggesting long years of use. It is believed that the fortress may have sheltered scholars linked to the monastic schools of Karga, who fled deeper into the desert when Arab expansion reshaped Egypt's intellectual centres. The climate here, dry beyond imagining, became their ally, preserving what little moisture the ink could afford to lose. When raiders and drought began to close in, the scholars turned their pens to shovels, sealing their archives beneath stone and salt. Legends collected from nearby villages speak of manuscripts buried in ceramic jars, their openings sealed with bitumen to keep out the desert air. Some accounts suggest that even the fortress's wells were used as hiding places, the water drawn out, the scrolls lowered in bundles, the shafts filled again with sand. Such concealment was not uncommon. The Nag Hammadi codices were found under similar circumstances centuries later. Yet Qasr al-Gwaita remained silent, its buried texts unclaimed, its guardians dispersed by time and war. The sand erased the footsteps of the last man who touched the hidden stacks, and the fortress stood once again as it had in its first age, empty, waiting. It was not until the 20th century that archaeologists found faint traces of papyrus and ink in chambers they believed to be empty. The Egyptian Antiquities Service and later the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale excavated the site, documenting layers of soot, grain storage, and ceramics dating to late antiquity. Among them were tiny ink stains on sandstone and a few charred fragments of scroll, too damaged to read but unmistakably man-made. These small pieces of evidence led scholars to speculate that Qasr al-Gwaita was more than a fortress. It was a desert scriptorium, a hidden archive preserved by neglect. Still, no full manuscripts were recovered, leading some to believe that the greater cache remained sealed in some unmarked chamber or buried under collapsed floors beyond current excavation zones. During the 1990s, a renewed expedition led by the Supreme Council of Antiquities in collaboration with Oxford University returned to the site, bringing portable spectrometers and microimaging tools. They detected organic traces within the lowest chambers, residues of linen, animal glue, and ancient carbon-based inks, all consistent with manuscript production. Excavators also identified faint impressions of shelving carved directly into the sandstone, suggesting that the rooms had once been arranged as archives rather than storehouses. No scrolls were recovered, but the evidence of preparation, of a space designed for preservation rather than mere habitation, gave new weight to the old stories of a buried library waiting beneath the desert crust. Scholars still argue whether these remnants belong to one of Egypt's earliest desert libraries or merely a fragment of a greater one lost to sand. The Karga Oasis project, which has surveyed nearby sites such as Qasr al-Zayan and Dush, has uncovered evidence of interconnected monastic settlements, suggesting that Qasr al-Gwaita may have been part of a network of learning, a kind of dispersed library system spread across the oases linked by faith and secrecy. The absence of large finds has done little to silence the fascination surrounding the fortress. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed hollow cavities beneath its central platform, but excavation is hindered by the fragility of the structure. The very sand that once preserved its mysteries now guards them. Some archaeologists note a strange consistency between the materials found here and those recovered from the White Monastery near Sohag, where similar jars and bindings were used to store sacred texts. If these parallels are true, the archives of Qasr al-Gwaita may still lie intact beneath its foundations, sealed by those who feared their knowledge might be misunderstood or destroyed. In the villages nearby, where the wind never stops moving, elders still speak of the room that sleeps under the fortress, a phrase so old that even its origin is uncertain. Yet it persists, passed from one generation to the next, a story about words sleeping beneath the sand untouched since the day they were hidden. What lingers under Casa Algueta is not ruin, but the faint pulse of thought refusing to fade. The hidden chamber library of a colonial plantation estate. Under the sweltering stillness of the tropics, where cicadas hum through air heavy with the scent of sugarcane and decay, there lies the crumbling estate of Rosehill. A colonial plantation once belonging to the British Caribbean elite, its foundations sunk deep into the red soil of Jamaica's interior. The main house, with its warped shutters and fading coral stone facade, still bears the marks of an era when profit was carved from human misery. It was here, behind layers of plaster and gilt, that a discovery decades later would unsettle even the most seasoned of historians. A hidden library sealed within the walls of the plantation's drawing room, untouched since the 19th century. Those who first entered the chamber described the air as almost liquid with age, dense with the odour of dust and rotting parchment. Stacked along the narrow room were wooden shelves built into the masonry itself, lined with hundreds of volumes bound in calfskin and faded vellum, their spines cracked and titles obscured. The collection appeared to have been arranged with deliberate secrecy. Theological treatises, Enlightenment philosophy, travelogues of the Indies, and journals written in hands too hurried and private to have been meant for open reading. At the back of the chamber, wedged beneath a warped arch, stood an iron-bound chest containing documents written in both English and Portuguese, including ledgers of slave transactions and coded correspondence between planters across the Caribbean. The air seemed thick with contradictions, knowledge and cruelty sharing the same space. The plantation's early records, preserved in colonial archives in London, confirm that Rosehill was built in the 1780s by Thomas Hargreaves, a former East India Company clerk who, like many of his class, crossed oceans seeking fortune. He was known for his intellect and his suspicion of both church and crown, keeping extensive notes on philosophy, astronomy and trade. Yet beneath his name appear the marks of hundreds of enslaved Africans listed simply as field hands, their humanity reduced to entries beside weights of sugar and casks of rum. When British emancipation laws were passed in the 1830s, his descendants abandoned the estate, leaving its deeper contents forgotten beneath vines and creeping rot. No one recorded the existence of a library, and yet the books remained, as though hidden by hands that feared both time and judgment. Among the manuscripts found were several volumes bearing Latin titles unknown to catalogues of the period. One, written in brittle ink, contained a list of prohibited works of reason and the divine, suggesting that Hargreaves or his associates had smuggled banned Enlightenment texts through the colonial ports of Kingston. In the late 18th century, authorities frequently confiscated such material. Voltaire, Rousseau, and radical pamphlets that questioned empire and slavery alike. The discovery of these works inside a plantation house was not merely ironic but unsettling. They were ideas that could have threatened the very system sustaining their owners' wealth. Some historians later proposed that the hidden chamber may have served a dual purpose: part sanctuary for forbidden knowledge, part vault for evidence too dangerous to expose. It is the silence around its creation that deepens the mystery. Structural engineers who examined the room noted that it had no external entrance. The doorway had been bricked over, its outline concealed behind a wall of plaster and paint. The only access was through a narrow opening revealed after a section of flooring collapsed beneath a researcher's weight during restoration. The chamber measured barely 4 meters across, its roof supported by hand-hewn beams of mahogany that predated the main house. It may have been constructed first, perhaps as a refuge or a strong room, and later repurposed to hide writings not meant to survive the scrutiny of the empire. Beneath the shelves lay a scattering of melted candle stubs, suggesting that someone had used the room at night, long after the plantation had fallen into decline. Further intrigue came from the annotations within the books themselves. In the margins of several texts, including an 1804 edition of a treatise on the rights of man, appeared notes written in a second, more hurried hand, possibly that of an overseer or literate servant. The handwriting, rough yet articulate, offered brief reflections on freedom, belief, and mortality, with one phrase recurring across multiple volumes: "Light cannot serve those who worship chains." It was an expression far too bold for a planter's household, hinting that the library's secrecy may have been shared between master and enslaved alike. Some scholars have since speculated that the chamber may have been used by literate servants to read or copy forbidden texts in secret, a quiet rebellion hidden behind walls built to enforce obedience. When the discovery reached academic circles in Kingston and London, experts attempted to trace the provenance of each book. Many bore stamps from defunct printing houses in Bristol, Lisbon and Calcutta, suggesting a network of trade more intellectual than mercantile. One set of volumes, wrapped in sailcloth and found in a trunk, contained nautical maps of the Atlantic bearing faint pencil routes, possibly those of slave ships altered to disguise their true voyages. These maps, together with letters written in cipher, have yet to be fully decoded. It was as if the chamber had preserved not just knowledge but conscience, a record of men and women who questioned the empire's moral architecture but lacked the courage to confront it openly. The physical atmosphere of the room contributes to its eerie power. Photographs taken by archaeologists show walls lined with black mould, yet beneath the decay, fragments of paint reveal celestial motifs, stars, compasses and faded Latin inscriptions about light and redemption. Whether these were part of the original decor or later additions remains uncertain. The positioning of candles still wedged in iron holders implies a ritual of reading or reflection that transcended simple study. The idea of enlightenment, both intellectual and spiritual, seemed to have been enacted in secret, within a structure that epitomized oppression. Today, the Rose Hill estate stands as a heritage site under slow restoration. Visitors are allowed to view parts of the house, though the hidden chamber remains sealed for preservation. Curators describe the room as unstable, its humidity too high for prolonged exposure, yet whispers persist that the true reason lies in what has not been catalogued. Local workers have reported strange drafts passing through cracks in the floor, carrying the scent of old paper and wax, though no ventilation shafts exist beneath. During one inspection, a faint inscription was noticed above the arch of the concealed doorway, a fragment of Latin roughly translating to "All knowledge is guilt when the truth is buried." Archival correspondences from the Colonial Office provide one more layer of unease. A letter dated 1837 from a plantation accountant refers cryptically to the sealed study where the master keeps the books of souls. The phrase could easily have meant account ledgers, yet the wording feels deliberate, as if acknowledging that the plantation's economy extended beyond material trade. No subsequent records mention the study again. By the time emancipation arrived, the Hargreaves family had fled to England, leaving the estate to collapse under vines and monsoon rains. For nearly 2 centuries, locals avoided the site, claiming the house emitted a whispering sound at night, especially when the sea wind moved through the hollow halls. What remains most haunting is the sense that the hidden library was never meant to be discovered. Its concealment was too deliberate, its contents too contradictory to fit any official narrative of empire. In a world where books could inspire both rebellion and repentance, perhaps the chamber was an act of preservation, a confession disguised as scholarship. The plantation's grandeur has faded, but beneath its decaying floors lies a testament to minds caught between enlightenment and cruelty, reason and silence. And deep within that walled chamber, beneath the dust and dim light, something unseen still breathes among the pages. The underground wartime library of an occupied European city. Every word stored here was a risk, every page a silent act of defiance against eyes that would have destroyed it. In basements, cellars and repurposed utility rooms beneath cities under Nazi occupation, books that challenged ideology or carried forbidden ideas were smuggled and preserved with painstaking care. The shelves were improvised from crates, discarded planks and scavenged timber, each volume carefully catalogued by hand and often numbered in secret codes known only to a handful of trusted participants. The dim light of a single candle or a kerosene lamp illuminated spines that had survived printing houses across Europe, from Paris to Warsaw, their covers still faintly embossed with names that were banned, burned, or at risk of disappearing forever. In a city where curfews ruled the streets and censorship reached into homes, even knowledge became contraband. Libraries were closed or heavily monitored, and any material deemed subversive was immediately confiscated or destroyed. Authors like Stefan Zweig, Emil Zola, and Sigmund Freud could no longer circulate openly, and Jewish, communist, and anti-fascist writings were especially targeted. citizens moved quietly along shadowed alleys, whispering their thoughts, yet refusing to surrender the ideas that might sustain them intellectually and morally. It was in this climate of fear that clandestine libraries arose, not as grand institutions, but as fragile networks of resilience where human curiosity persisted despite the weight of oppression. They gathered what could not survive in the open, weaving a network of texts through whispers and code. Teachers, librarians, scholars, and ordinary citizens smuggled books from private collections, postal routes, and even confiscated shipments, often hiding them beneath floorboards, inside hollow walls, or beneath barrels of grain and coal. In some cases, bundles were concealed within crates marked for harmless commodities, transported across districts under the guise of mundane trade. The libraries were meticulously organised to survive detection, with records written in ciphers, alphabetical systems that only insiders could decipher, and catalogues that concealed not just the titles, but the very existence of certain works. Each volume became more than paper and ink. It was a statement of human defiance and a commitment to intellectual continuity in the face of annihilation. Hollowed volumes, false compartments, and hidden ledgers transformed ordinary objects into vessels of preservation. Encyclopedias were split to form secret compartments, furniture was hollowed to store manuscripts, and unused storage rooms were converted into subterranean reading spaces. Even the most mundane items carried dual purposes. A coal sack could shield a bundle of banned pamphlets. A sewing chest might conceal diaries or letters that chronicled occupation life. And trays in kitchen pantries occasionally served as concealment for philosophical treatises. The ingenuity of these methods speaks to a careful balance of creativity and risk, reflecting both the ingenuity of ordinary citizens and the extreme peril of discovery, when even a single misplaced book could provoke violent punishment. Hands traced forbidden letters, eyes scanned pages that might have condemned them if discovered. In these clandestine spaces, reading became an intimate and dangerous act, a shared ritual among those who understood the consequences of exposure. Accounts preserved after the war describe the hush that fell over these rooms, the tension in the air, and the mutual understanding that each person present carried a responsibility for the survival of the collection. Poetry, history, philosophy, and science all coexisted on the same shelves, often side by side with newspapers or pamphlets hidden beneath layers of protective wrappings. It was not only the content that mattered, but the act of preservation itself, the knowledge that someone somewhere had refused to let ideas vanish despite the machinery of censorship and fear. Raids, deportations, and the relentless pounding of war left only fragments of what had been protected so fiercely. Some caches were discovered and destroyed. Others were partially damaged by bombings, fires, or the damp that seeped through forgotten walls. Survivors often carried only portions of the original library, sometimes memorizing sections or copying texts by hand in secret to ensure their survival. Historical records indicate that in cities such as Warsaw, Amsterdam, and Paris, these underground collections were vital repositories for communities under siege, yet so fragile that the loss of even one trusted custodian could imperil the entire archive. Every recovered book after liberation was a testament to the courage, planning, and sheer willpower of those who risked everything to protect it. Decades later, remnants emerged from rubble, damaged but stubbornly legible, as if insisting on being remembered. Archaeologists and archivists uncovered stacks of manuscripts in cellars and tunnels, fragile letters bound with string, and journals recording everyday life under occupation, often written in shorthand or coded language to evade detection. Some books still carried the faint scent of kerosene and candle smoke, evidence of the night spent reading by flickering light. The texts included works by banned European authors, underground pamphlets printed clandestinely, and reports documenting local acts of resistance. Each discovery carried the weight of survival and loss, illuminating how ordinary citizens had assumed extraordinary responsibility to protect the intellectual and cultural heritage of their cities. No record explains who last turned the pages or why some volumes were left behind. Many of the custodians perished, were deported, or were forced into hiding, leaving behind collections whose provenance is partially unknowable. Correspondence and diaries recovered from other archives hint at networks that stretched across neighbourhoods and cities, yet gaps remain, leaving historians to reconstruct events from fragmented accounts. It is clear that the hidden libraries were never static. They moved with the risk, adapted to the threat, and were maintained with devotion that was often invisible to the outside world. The mystery of who curated the final selections and why certain works survived while others vanished remains unresolved, a testament to both human resilience and the capriciousness of history. Even now, in post-war cities, traces of these clandestine archives continue to surface unexpectedly. In basements recently renovated for modern use, researchers occasionally uncover letters pressed between volumes, faded pencil annotations, or fragments of newspaper clippings tucked between pages. Museums and libraries that have received donations of recovered texts report that provenance is often incomplete, leaving questions about their original journey and the identities of those who risked everything to protect them. The act of discovery itself mirrors the very essence of these wartime collections, a reminder that knowledge can endure despite violence, fear, and the passage of decades, but it can also vanish silently, leaving only shadows of what once existed. Some volumes remain uncatalogued, their origins mysterious, their contents partially illegible, as if waiting for someone with the patience and insight to unlock their secrets. The physical fragility of the manuscripts mirrors the precarious circumstances of their preservation. Brittle paper, faded ink, and water-damaged bindings tell a story as compelling as the words they contain. Researchers note that, in certain cases, these fragments reveal networks of intellectual resistance, secret exchanges between cities, and the persistence of cultural memory that might otherwise have been erased by the machinery of war. Each book is at once a document and a relic, bridging the past and present while leaving questions unresolved. While the city above moves on, below it, another forgotten cache waits, preserved in silence and shadow. The Arctic icebound reading room. Snowdrifts swallowed the abandoned station, and beneath the frozen floor lay books that had not felt human hands for decades. The wind whistled across the desolate plain, carrying the scent of ice and metal, and the silence was broken only by the creak of shifting boards and the crunch of frost underfoot. Within the insulated walls of the small hut, layers of dust and frost clung to every surface, yet amid the decay, the remnants of human endeavour persisted. Journals, charts, and treatises meticulously stored by explorers who had braved the relentless polar expanse. Time had frozen both the structure and its contents, leaving a stillness so absolute that even the faintest creak of a hinge felt like a shout across the ice. Early explorers crossed the ice with compasses, sextants, and a few precious volumes that could guide their minds as well as their bodies. British and Norwegian expeditions of the early 20th century carried books that spanned navigation manuals, meteorological tables, and scientific treatises, each chosen with care because survival in the polar regions demanded both knowledge and observation. Teams led by figures such as Robert Falcon Scott and Roald Amundsen relied on the meticulous recording of environmental conditions, yet their libraries were far more than tools for survival. They represented a fragile thread of civilization in a landscape indifferent to human effort. Maps of crevasses and glaciers, once folded into oilcloth and tucked beneath heavy coats, became as valuable as rations or sled dogs. Inside the insulated hut, wooden crates and shelves held journals, maps and treatises, each carefully sealed against the threat of ice and wind. Explorers improvised storage solutions, reinforcing walls with scavenged timber and metal brackets to prevent collapse under heavy snow loads. Books were wrapped in waxed cloth or stored in airtight tins, while important documents were often suspended from rafters to avoid damp floors. Each volume bore evidence of its journey across the ice. Frostbitten corners, ink slightly blurred by condensation, and spines cracked from the cold. The library itself became a testament to human foresight and patience, its survival dependent on meticulous attention to detail and an almost ritualistic respect for the fragility of knowledge in a place where one mistake could spell disaster. By the light of oil lamps, scientists traced glaciers on maps and recorded temperatures in ink that threatened to freeze on the page. Hours were long, and the polar night lasted months, leaving explorers with little else to do but study, write, and preserve their observations. Journals recorded the shifting positions of icebergs, the formation of polyneas, and subtle changes in atmospheric pressure, while treatises on biology documented specimens collected from the barren tundra. Reading became a form of quiet resistance against the monotony and isolation, an assertion of mental and cultural survival in a landscape that tolerated nothing but endurance. Each annotation, margin note or correction was both a scientific record and a human fingerprint in a place almost entirely devoid of life. A sudden blizzard could bury the hut in hours, leaving months of observations and fragile books trapped under layers of ice. Whiteouts erased paths, obliterated markers, and threatened to swallow any trace of human habitation, while temperatures plunged far below zero, causing ink to freeze and bindings to shatter. Some records were lost forever when huts collapsed under the weight of snow or were abandoned as expeditions retreated in the face of insurmountable weather. The Arctic's indifference to human presence made every preserved volume remarkable. What remained was not just the product of knowledge, but of extraordinary foresight and the delicate balance between risk and survival. When supply teams returned years later, many texts were brittle, water-stained, or half buried in snow that had seeped through broken windows. Some journals, once carefully rolled and wrapped, were found stiff as boards, pages fused by frost, yet still legible in parts. Maps of ice flows and uncharted fjords were annotated with pencil markings that had faded to a ghostly grey, providing insights into early exploration methods and observations that had been forgotten in the years following evacuation. Letters and personal notes between expedition members were recovered alongside scientific reports, revealing both the technical challenges of polar survival and the quiet human stories that endured despite the extreme environment. Archived notebooks revealed precise observations of polar winds and auroras, insights that had guided generations of scientists yet remained unknown for decades. Meteorological readings recorded daily temperatures, wind chill factors, and barometric pressure, forming a continuous record that would later inform climate studies. Biological notes described lichens, mosses, and microscopic organisms found under snow, while astronomical observations helped calibrate early navigation instruments. Even the most mundane entries, such as ration logs and sled maintenance, offered context for the hardships endured and the careful management required to protect both human life and the fragile repository of books. Each recovered volume was a bridge between survival, knowledge, and the endurance of human curiosity in one of the planet's harshest environments. Some shelves, still sealed beneath layers of ice, hinted observations and discoveries never fully understood or catalogued. Despite modern expeditions and technological surveys, parts of the original reading room remain inaccessible, buried under deep snowdrifts or hidden in structural recesses that resist excavation. Researchers speculate that additional journals, maps, or even personal writings may lie untouched, containing unknown data on glacial movements, polar wildlife, or expedition logistics that could reshape historical understanding. The Arctic preserves its secrets with patience, and the reading room stands as a monument to the fragility of knowledge when faced with the relentless passage of time and the unforgiving cold. Fragments of human presence endure in subtle traces, frost patterns on window panes that once glimmered in candlelight, indentations in the wooden floor from sleds dragged inside, and faint pencil marks on charts outlining routes that led explorers to safety or peril. Each surviving document is evidence of both ingenuity and vulnerability, a tangible reminder that the harshest environments can harbour both loss and discovery. Scholars note that the interplay between preservation and decay in these icebound libraries mirrors the duality of polar exploration itself, triumph against nature tempered by the omnipresent risk of obliteration. At the remote stations, even modern expeditions find the reading room inspiring awe and stirring uncertainty. Conservators and historians handle journals with gloved hands, carefully unrolling pages that survived frost and neglect, marvelling at the observations recorded under extreme duress. Maps are studied not only for their historical significance, but also for the skill required to produce accurate measurements in conditions where a single miscalculation could have been fatal. The silence of the Arctic amplifies the mystery. Each recovered text is not merely a record of the past, but a reminder of what might still be hidden beneath snow and ice, waiting for the moment it can be read again. Encased in ice, a forgotten page waits, its frost-laden words holding secrets that remain inaccessible to human eyes. The Jungle Temple's Vault of Scrolls. Scholars who stumbled across the temple's inner chambers found scrolls that chronicled vanished dynasties, medicinal knowledge, and celestial calculations. The manuscripts, stacked in careful piles and bound with lacquered twine, hinted at a civilization that valued knowledge as both sacred and practical. Their discovery was not the result of random wandering, but of methodical excavation, guided by stone inscriptions that pointed to hidden passageways and niches deliberately constructed to conceal these texts. The sense of encountering something long protected, yet almost lost to time, permeated the air, leaving the researchers aware that the knowledge before them had survived centuries of secrecy, neglect, and the relentless encroachment of the jungle. Built centuries ago under royal patronage, the temple served as both a spiritual centre and a repository for knowledge deemed essential to governance and religious practice. Kings and high priests commissioned scribes to inscribe chronicles of rulership, celestial observations, and ritual practices onto palm leaves and bamboo strips, ensuring that wisdom could be preserved beyond a single lifetime. Architectural records suggest that chambers were specifically designed to house these scrolls, with ventilation shafts and elevated niches intended to reduce humidity and deter both rodents and uninvited hands. In the centuries that followed, the temple became a living library, a place where intellect and devotion converged under the same roof, even as the surrounding civilization ebbed and shifted. Scrolls were coated in resin and lacquered, then nested within carved niches in stone walls, ensuring their survival against both natural decay and human interference. In some chambers, palm leaves were wrapped in protective cloth and placed inside cylindrical bamboo cases sealed with clay stoppers, a method that helped to stave off insects and the effects of damp air. Larger manuscripts were often propped upright on wooden shelves treated with oils extracted from local plants, a preservation technique documented in later historical texts. The meticulous care reflected the belief that knowledge was not merely functional but sacred, and that to lose a scroll was to lose part of the collective memory of a civilization. Some manuscripts outlined the movement of stars and planets, providing calendars and astrological guidance used for both agricultural planning and religious ceremonies, while others documented local remedies, rituals, and genealogies of rulers long forgotten. Buddhist and Hindu temples alike preserved texts that blended observation with philosophy, chronicling events with precision yet embedding them within spiritual cosmology. Treatises on herbal medicine detailed plant properties and dosages, reflecting centuries of observation in the tropical environment. Even minor annotations in margins revealed the evolving interpretation of these texts, suggesting that the scrolls were living documents, constantly referenced and updated by successive generations of scholars. Monks laboured quietly in dim chambers, tracing delicate letters on palm leaves and bamboo strips, ensuring that the wisdom of past generations would endure. Some copied texts for travelling emissaries or for subordinate temples in distant regions, while others carefully checked older manuscripts for errors caused by time or insect damage. The work was painstaking, requiring steady hands, the right inks and dyes, and knowledge of both script and meaning. Silence and ritual governed these acts, for the preservation of knowledge was intertwined with spiritual devotion, and every mistake could mean both a loss of information and a breach of sacred duty. Invasions, humidity, and termites all threatened the fragile manuscripts, and many scrolls were lost or partially destroyed despite careful protection. Historical records indicate that neighbouring kingdoms periodically raided temples, taking treasures and often burning or discarding texts considered unnecessary or incomprehensible. Meanwhile, the tropical climate introduced constant threats. Fungal growth, mould, and the slow corrosion of organic materials could render entire collections illegible in mere decades. Yet, the survival of even fragments attests to the ingenuity of the temple's designers and the dedication of those who served as custodians, as well as the unpredictable resilience of the materials themselves. Recent excavations revealed stacks of bamboo and palm leaf scrolls, some still legible, their inscriptions offering new insights into kingdoms that had vanished beneath the forest canopy. Archaeologists found that ink had faded, edges were frayed, and some scrolls had split along natural fibres, yet the majority retained sufficient clarity to reconstruct historical events, medicinal formulas, and ceremonial practices. Cross-referencing the texts with stone carvings and regional chronicles allowed researchers to identify rulers and events previously unknown, rewriting aspects of Southeast Asian history. The combination of material culture and surviving manuscripts created a mosaic of human knowledge that had survived centuries, largely hidden from view. Yet some chambers remain sealed, their contents untouched, suggesting that entire sections of ancient knowledge may still lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Archaeologists speculate that additional scrolls may include advanced astronomical calculations, previously unknown medical treatments, or records of trade, diplomacy, and conquest that could illuminate connections between distant regions. The temple's construction, with false walls and intricate niches, hints at the lengths to which its builders went to protect information from both time and intruders. Every discovery fuels the sense that the temple, though centuries old, continues to guard secrets that could alter the understanding of the civilizations that produced it. Traces of human interaction endure in subtle ways: faint imprints of hands on waxed scrolls, slight abrasions on bamboo strips, and the remnants of ink pigments that have resisted both time and humidity. These artifacts are not merely passive objects, they are evidence of centuries of custodianship, the transmission of knowledge, and the silent diligence of scholars who laboured in near darkness to ensure that wisdom would survive beyond their own lives. In studying them, modern researchers confront the duality of the temple's legacy, what has been preserved and what remains tantalisingly out of reach, still waiting for those capable of reading its secrets. Within these temples, even after partial clearance and cataloguing, the vault's full extent remains a mystery. Some niches are too narrow for contemporary archaeologists to access safely, while others are obscured by collapsed ceilings or overgrown vegetation. Scholars must rely on indirect evidence, historical records, and careful inference to piece together the probable contents, yet each uncovered scroll or manuscript adds to the mystery, hinting at patterns, teachings, or observations that have lain dormant for centuries. The sense of quiet anticipation, of knowledge that survived concealment and conflict, makes the vault a place of enduring intrigue. A single scroll lies hidden beneath layers of stone and lacquer, its words preserved in silence, untouched for centuries. The disused railway tunnel library. Amid the upheavals of a fractured city, scholars and activists sought a refuge for banned books and fragile manuscripts, driven by the certainty that knowledge could not be allowed to vanish. They did not choose the location for its comfort or convenience, but for its isolation, the long-forgotten corridor offering concealment from authorities and prying eyes. In hushed tones and by dim lantern light, they moved through the space, carrying precious volumes and fragile pamphlets, aware that every step could leave a mark that might betray their secret. The tunnel, once a conduit of industry and commerce, had become an artery of intellectual defiance, a place where ideas could breathe despite the shadows pressing in from above. Constructed to carry trains through the city's industrial sprawl, the tunnel was abandoned decades later, its tracks rusting and its walls silent, leaving a hidden passage ideal for clandestine activity. Engineers who once laboured to maintain its rails and masonry had long departed, leaving behind only the hollow echo of wheels and whistles. Over time, nature and neglect began to claim the tunnel. Moisture seeped through brickwork, small plants found purchase in cracks, and the air carried the musty tang of decay. For those who sought to repurpose it, these very conditions offered an advantage, making it unlikely that casual passers-by or authorities would stumble upon what would soon become a repository of hidden knowledge. Wooden shelves were built along the damp walls, crates stacked carefully, and fragile manuscripts wrapped in cloth and tucked into every recess that could hold them. Improvised benches and tables allowed clandestine study, while oil lamps flickered, casting dancing shadows on brick and timber. Every arrangement was deliberate. Fragile works elevated to avoid damp floors, stacks balanced to prevent collapse, and pathways cleared for discreet movement. Some books were bound in leather and cloth, others in simple paper and cardboard, all meticulously inventoried by hand. Even the smallest manuscripts were accounted for, their titles noted on scraps of paper that themselves became records of human effort to preserve forbidden knowledge. The collection included banned political pamphlets, rare first editions, newspapers censored by authorities, and scholarly works deemed too controversial for public circulation. Among these were treatises on social reform, essays challenging prevailing ideologies, and historical accounts suppressed by governments seeking to control narrative. Some volumes contained meticulous sketches, maps, and diagrams illustrating innovations in engineering, medicine, and local governance. The sheer variety of the archive reflected not only the urgency to protect intellectual freedom, but also the eclectic curiosity of those who risked their safety to gather and maintain these materials, ensuring that the breadth of human thought would not be silenced. Elevating crates on makeshift platforms, applying protective coatings to bindings, and carefully monitoring the occasional leaks, the custodians worked to ensure fragile pages endured the years. Cloth coverings were replaced periodically, and small sandbags weighed down loose papers to prevent scattering during minor floods or vibrations from nearby construction. In some cases, metal boxes were welded shut to protect more valuable items, and rudimentary ventilation allowed the air to circulate, reducing mould and mildew. These interventions were not always sufficient, yet they demonstrated the determination and ingenuity of those who understood that a lapse in care could erase decades of collected wisdom in a single wet season or accidental mishap. Those who entered did so under the cover of darkness, aware that discovery could mean imprisonment, and moved silently through narrow corridors as their hands brushed against centuries of fragile paper. Their movements were precise and deliberate, guided by prior visits and coded notes left by others. Some arrived carrying only a single manuscript, while others delivered entire crates from sympathetic supporters, their footsteps muffled against the dust-covered floor. Whispered conversations discussed cataloguing methods, translation of difficult texts, and the risk of infiltration. Each visitor understood the precarious balance between safeguarding knowledge and remaining invisible in a city that had long since forgotten the tunnel's original purpose. Once the political climate shifted and the tunnels were forgotten, the library lay silent once more until historians and explorers, following old blueprints, stumbled upon crates of preserved knowledge. Their arrival was cautious, guided by fragments of oral history and maps drawn in the margins of surviving documents. Dust choked the air, cobwebs clung to beams, and some sections had collapsed, forcing researchers to navigate narrow and partially blocked passageways. Despite these obstacles, they began the painstaking process of cataloguing, photographing, and preserving the manuscripts, revealing texts that chronicled not only the political struggles of the city but also everyday life, local innovations, and philosophical debates that had been intentionally obscured from the public record. Not all shelves were accounted for, and some sections remained blocked, hinting at volumes that may have been spirited away or remain concealed, holding secrets yet to be understood. Evidence of hasty removal and partial destruction suggests that some custodians fled under pressure, leaving certain crates deliberately hidden or booby-trapped to deter intruders. Even the most meticulous searches have yet to uncover every manuscript, and rumours persist of lost volumes containing sensitive correspondence, revolutionary treatises, or unique perspectives on historical events. Each discovery renews speculation, revealing fragments of human thought that survived both neglect and persecution, but leaving the broader extent of the archive tantalizingly incomplete. Subtle reminders of human presence linger here: scratched wooden shelves, dusted bindings marked by fingerprints, and delicate notes tucked between pages that trace the life of each text. These remnants serve as a silent testimony to the risks taken by those who valued knowledge over personal safety, a network of intellect and courage that operated far from public scrutiny. Even in a city now bustling above the old tunnel, the echoes of past endeavours linger in the air, a reminder that the preservation of ideas often requires spaces hidden from view, yet alive with human intention and care. The corridor, long abandoned and partially decayed, continues to draw curiosity from historians and explorers, each visit revealing incremental insights into the library's scope and contents. Scholars have begun to cross-reference the recovered materials with known publications, uncovering discrepancies, lost editions, and local interpretations of global events. Every artifact recovered from the tunnel tells a story, not only of the ideas it conveys, but of the determination required to safeguard it. The combination of material evidence and historical context forms a mosaic of clandestine preservation that challenges assumptions about what knowledge survived and how it travelled through both time and secrecy. In recent years, conservation efforts have stabilised many of the manuscripts, yet much remains precarious, requiring careful handling and specialised treatment. Techniques borrowed from modern archival science, including controlled humidity, acid-free storage, and digital imaging, have begun to safeguard the texts for future study. Yet the conditions in which they were preserved for decades, damp, dimly lit, and partially sealed, have left many still fragile, and gaps remain in the archive. Each recovered text raises questions about what is missing, what was destroyed, and what may yet lie hidden in inaccessible corners of the tunnel. In the shadowed depths of the tunnel, a single crate waits, its contents silent for decades, yet poised to reshape our knowledge of the past. The Mountaintop Hermit's book cache. The hermit Tenzin Sangpo dedicated decades to preserving manuscripts, crafting a hidden collection that few would ever glimpse. Every scroll and volume was selected with care, chosen not only for its knowledge but for its potential to survive the passage of time in a place where human presence was rare and the natural world relentless. Preservation was a deliberate act, born from the certainty that ideas could vanish if left unguarded, and that even the most fragile texts might hold keys to wisdom lost to broader society. This cache was not built for comfort or convenience, but as a silent testament to intellectual devotion and meticulous foresight. Each manuscript required painstaking attention, with careful folding, rewiring of damaged bindings, and precise placement to avoid wear and tear. Bamboo scrolls were rolled tightly and wrapped in cloth treated with natural oils, while palm leaf texts were stacked on small wooden platforms to avoid moisture and prevent insect damage. Tenzin Sangpo's methods combined empirical observation with centuries of traditional preservation techniques, demonstrating a profound understanding of materials and the passage of time. The hermit moved deliberately, knowing that even minor neglect could allow decay to destroy decades of painstaking collection. Shelves, niches, and small compartments were constructed from materials salvaged from distant villages, shaped and fitted with an understanding of balance and durability. Crates were reinforced to withstand damp and shifting stone, while clay jars sealed fragile scrolls from dust and minor flooding. Every modification reflected human ingenuity in response to an extreme environment. Small, contained spaces were engineered to maintain relative dryness, and objects were rotated periodically to ensure the preservation of all surfaces. Even the simplest containers became critical tools in safeguarding irreplaceable knowledge. The contents of the cache reflected both scholarly rigour and spiritual exploration. Treatises on meditation and philosophy rested beside astronomical charts, herbals, and notes on local flora, revealing a mind attentive to the practical as well as the metaphysical. Hand-copied commentaries on ancient texts were interspersed with original observations, recording everything from seasonal cycles to observations of celestial phenomena. Each manuscript served as both a vessel of knowledge and a reflection of Tenzin Sangpo's disciplined, lifelong commitment to intellectual cultivation. The variety of subjects demonstrated that even in isolation, curiosity and erudition remained intertwined. Preservation required constant vigilance and adaptive techniques. Scrolls were checked for signs of moisture or decay, bindings were treated with natural resins, and fragile pages were wrapped in layers of cloth or placed inside clay jars to limit exposure to dust and sudden temperature changes. Airflow within the storage spaces was monitored and subtly adjusted to prevent stagnation and mold growth, an intuitive understanding of microclimates guiding decisions that would ensure the collection survived decades of solitude. Each manuscript became a partner in a careful, ongoing experiment to defy entropy. Daily life revolved around these manuscripts. Tenzin Sangpo spent hours examining texts by candlelight, copying passages, annotating margins, and reflecting on the insights of prior generations. Study and preservation were inseparable, each task reinforcing the other, forming a rhythm of devotion that blurred the boundaries between labour and contemplation. Even the act of moving manuscripts from one shelf to another was treated as a ritual, undertaken with care and mindfulness, ensuring that every page retained its place in the larger order of the collection. Knowledge became both occupation and sanctuary, a reason to endure the isolation demanded by the mountain heights. Constant threats loomed over the collection, even under the most meticulous care. Dampness occasionally seeped through cracks, insects found their way into corners, and minor rockfalls threatened to displace or damage manuscripts. Human intrusion was rare but possible, and rumours of wandering explorers or local villagers occasionally prompted adjustments to concealment and storage. Each threat required innovation. Scrolls were repacked, shelves shifted, and protective layers reinforced. These measures illustrate the hermit's acute awareness that preservation was not a static act, but an ongoing engagement with both environment and risk, a silent battle fought in isolation. Rediscovery came centuries later, when oral histories and fragmented records led researchers to the hermit's cache. Explorers and historians carefully navigated the spaces, uncovering manuscripts that had survived through careful planning and centuries of solitude. Dusty surfaces and faint traces of previous handling revealed both the labour and the devotion that had gone into the collection, while missing volumes hinted at deliberate removal or loss over time. Scholars began to document and preserve the texts, yet even after decades of study, the collection remains only partially understood, with mysteries lingering in unexamined corners. Hidden pieces of the collection linger beyond reach, and the full extent of Tenzin Sangpo's work remains veiled in mystery. Notes found within the cache suggest additional manuscripts may lie hidden, sealed behind clever compartments or tucked in places too remote for casual access. These lost works could include rare commentaries, local medicinal knowledge, or insights into the hermit's own observations and innovations, preserving ideas that otherwise might have vanished completely. Each recovered volume renews curiosity about what remains concealed, offering glimpses of intellectual achievement preserved far from the scrutiny of conventional society. Modern conservation efforts have stabilized many of the surviving manuscripts, yet the cache retains its air of mystery. Digital imaging, careful restoration, and climate-controlled preservation have safeguarded fragile texts for study, yet even these interventions cannot fully replicate the conditions that allowed the original collection to endure. Scholars continue to debate the hermit's methods, the origins of the texts, and the reasoning behind selections that remain unknown. The legacy of Tenzin Sangpo persists in each careful reconstruction of the archive, reminding observers that knowledge, once hidden, can survive the centuries when nurtured with patience, ingenuity, and devotion. A bundle of unseen manuscripts rests somewhere, its wisdom unread and secrets intact, holding the promise of revelations yet to be imagined. The hidden archive beneath a medieval abbey. Protecting knowledge deemed dangerous or divisive became a silent duty of the abbey's most trusted clerics, who understood that manuscripts might outlive rulers but could vanish in a single decree. The decision to conceal certain works was rarely questioned. It was an act of foresight and moral responsibility, a recognition that the preservation of learning sometimes required secrecy as much as devotion. Each volume chosen for the hidden archive carried weight: religious treatises, early legal codices, and philosophical writings that challenged prevailing interpretations of scripture or law, representing centuries of scholarship the abbey could neither display openly nor risk losing to the outside world. In this tension between exposure and concealment, knowledge itself became a sacred responsibility. Stone-lined vaults and iron-bound chests were constructed beneath layers of masonry, their existence known only to a few monks and the abbey's highest authorities. These chambers were designed not merely to store texts, but to protect them from inquisitions, fire, and prying hands, each chest fitted with locks and concealed behind false walls or beneath floors of the monastic complex. The vaults themselves were carefully chosen for their stability, often placed under chapels or cloisters where structural integrity and inaccessibility combined to shield the manuscripts. Every architectural choice reflected a deliberate understanding of both risk and preservation, balancing the need for concealment with the desire to maintain access for future study. The archive contained an extraordinary variety of manuscripts, each selected for its rarity and importance. Illuminated Gospels glimmered with gold leaf and hand-painted illustrations, their sacred words guarded in secrecy. Legal texts documented local customs and feudal obligations, some containing clauses suppressed by later authorities. Treatises on natural philosophy offered early observations of astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, revealing a broader intellectual curiosity that existed alongside strict religious study. Commentaries on scripture and theology, often written in careful small script, included interpretations that had once sparked controversy, and in some cases entire sections were deliberately obscured to prevent censure. Each item reflected a careful negotiation between knowledge, risk, and devotion. Archivists wrapped scrolls in linen, reinforced codices with wooden boards, and conditioned vellum to resist moisture, dust, and insect damage. Clerics rotated texts periodically, ensuring that pages were exposed to minimal wear while maintaining airflow to prevent stagnation. Candles and lamps were used sparingly, their light directed to avoid scorching fragile ink, and temperature differences were monitored intuitively, with manuscripts shifted to adapt to seasonal changes. The combination of materials, technique, and constant attention demonstrates the meticulous care invested by monks who recognized the impermanence of both physical objects and human institutions, seeking to give their knowledge a chance to endure beyond immediate threats. Monks moved quietly through hidden corridors, cataloguing volumes, repairing bindings, and annotating margins in ways that would only be understood by those initiated into the secret of the archive. Daily routines were dictated by a rhythm of study and stewardship, each action blending devotion with practicality. Scribes copied texts with precision, recording both the original content and any marginal notes, preserving not only the manuscripts themselves but the interpretations, insights, and decisions of previous generations. Knowledge was not treated as inert. It demanded engagement, meditation, and reflection, and every monk tasked with guarding it understood that failure could erase centuries of intellectual and spiritual labour. Crusades, local uprisings, and reforms of church doctrine threatened both the abbey and its hidden knowledge, compelling clerics to act swiftly to protect texts from destruction or confiscation. During periods of instability, manuscripts were moved from one vault to another, sometimes hidden behind altar stones, beneath trapdoors, or within hollowed wooden furniture. Certain volumes were even disassembled and stored in pieces to prevent theft or identification, a precaution that reflects both the value placed on knowledge and the precarious nature of its survival. Preservation was thus inseparable from strategy, and each monk became a guardian navigating a landscape of political, religious, and social uncertainty. Historians uncover fragments of manuscripts long thought lost, tracing marginalia, watermarks, and hidden annotations that reveal the care, fears, and priorities of those who once guarded them. Some volumes display faint fingerprints or marks indicating the rotation of pages for preservation, while others contain subtle notes recording dates, observations, and warnings for future custodians. Even the smallest traces offer insight into the cleric's intentions and methods, hinting at a sophisticated understanding of both knowledge and the human networks necessary to maintain it. Each discovery bridges centuries, connecting modern observers to hands that laboured in silence and secrecy. Unexplored chambers linger, their contents suggested only by faded maps, subtle architectural anomalies, and whispered accounts from local historians and clergy. The full extent of the archive is unknown, leaving the abbey itself partially mapped only through fragments and conjecture. Scholars continue to debate the locations of hidden rooms, the reasons for selective preservation, and the meaning behind cryptic markings, aware that every uncovered volume may answer questions but also generate new ones. The abbey's secret is thus not fully revealed, existing in the tension between historical record and the enduring possibility of discovery. Conservation and historical research guide modern study, yet the hidden chambers themselves maintain an inscrutable mystery. Some manuscripts are stabilized, digitally imaged, or transcribed, but others remain inaccessible, preserved in sealed stone and iron, untouched for centuries. Each recovered text is a reminder of the foresight and devotion that created the archive, while the unknown portions of the collection continue to captivate scholars and enthusiasts alike. The human story of care, secrecy, and intellectual devotion endures, shaping both the interpretation of the past and the curiosity of the present. Beneath centuries of stone and silence, a chest of manuscripts waits, its inscriptions concealed and its knowledge poised to challenge everything historians thought they knew. The secret library of a reclusive billionaire on a private island. Amassing knowledge became an obsession, a pursuit that transcended wealth and influence, focused entirely on acquiring texts that few had ever seen. Rare manuscripts, first editions, and obscure treatises were gathered not for display or public acclaim, but for the private satisfaction of possessing what others could not access. Each acquisition was deliberate, a reflection of a vision that combined historical fascination, literary passion, and the desire to safeguard cultural artifacts from neglect, dispersal, or destruction. In this hidden archive, power and curiosity converged, transforming ordinary collecting into a personal mission that rivaled the ambitions of any public institution. Advanced biometric locks, hidden chambers, and discrete architectural designs ensured that the collection remained invisible to all but those granted permission. Sensors monitored entrances, while reinforced steel doors and false walls concealed entire wings of shelving from casual observation. security was both physical and procedural. Every visitor underwent meticulous vetting, and access was controlled through a combination of technology, protocol, and discretion. The design of the library reflected a profound understanding of risk, blending modern engineering with an almost obsessive attention to detail, creating an environment where knowledge could be both protected and curated with unparalleled precision. First editions, rare manuscripts, annotated journals, and privately commissioned works filled the shelves, representing centuries of human thought and artistic endeavour. Volumes spanned the earliest printed texts in Europe, medieval illuminated manuscripts, scientific observations, and literary drafts that had never been widely circulated. Some works contained notes or marginalia that provided insight into historical contexts, or offered perspectives long forgotten by mainstream scholarship. The variety and rarity of the collection illustrated not only the collector's wide-ranging curiosity, but also a deliberate pursuit of items that could transform understanding of literature, science, and history if studied together. Accompanying some manuscripts are personal letters, travel notes, and private commissions, offering insight into the collector's careful engagement with authors, historians, and artisans worldwide. These ancillary materials often provide insight into the provenance of rare items, documenting negotiations, discoveries at auctions, and even travels to obscure private collections in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Handwritten letters and annotated receipts sometimes accompany the manuscripts, offering glimpses into the painstaking effort required to track down elusive texts. In several cases, the collector commissioned facsimiles or restorations to safeguard delicate originals, a practice that highlights both a reverence for authenticity and a desire to maintain access to knowledge without compromising the physical survival of each artifact. Climate control, dehumidification systems, and precision shelving were combined with careful human monitoring to ensure that each work remained in perfect condition. Humidity and temperature sensors alerted staff to even minor fluctuations, while specialized lighting minimized exposure to ultraviolet rays that could fade ink and damage delicate pages. The collector's assistants maintained a daily schedule of inspections, dusting, and repositioning of fragile volumes, aware that even a minor lapse could have irreversible consequences. Preservation was a constant, meticulous practice, balancing the technological advantages of the modern era with the careful hands-on attention that only human oversight could provide. Every book was catalogued with meticulous detail, cross-referenced in digital and handwritten ledgers that only a trusted few could interpret. Metadata, provenance records, and annotations were maintained in parallel systems to ensure redundancy, while personal observations by the collector and assistants added another layer of insight into each work's significance. Access was granted selectively, often accompanied by strict instructions on handling and recording, ensuring that every interaction left a minimal imprint on both the physical manuscripts and the broader understanding of the collection. This organizational rigor reflected an ethos of care and responsibility, emphasizing that knowledge could only endure if respected and accounted for. Visits were rare, schedules tightly controlled, and the library's existence known to almost no one outside a circle of confidence, enhancing both its security and its allure. The collector's private island served as a natural barrier, while secrecy itself became a form of protection, ensuring that curiosity did not translate into intrusion. Even staff members operated under strict confidentiality agreements, their movements and duties carefully choreographed to maintain discretion. The combination of isolation, technology, and human oversight created a space where the collection could exist largely untouched, a repository that was at once tangible and enigmatic, visible only to those permitted to glimpse it. Advanced cataloguing extends beyond books themselves, encompassing maps, rare prints, and three-dimensional objects that bridge scholarship and artistry in unexpected ways. Among the hidden collection are antique globes, early astronomical charts, and intricate models of historical machines, all carefully integrated into the library's indexing system. These objects are preserved under the same climate and security protocols as manuscripts, reflecting an understanding that knowledge exists in multiple forms and that physical artifacts can illuminate the past as vividly as written words. Scholars occasionally note that these items allow a reconstruction of historical context otherwise absent from the texts, offering tactile insight into the worlds, discoveries, and artistic achievements that informed the books themselves. Researchers granted rare access reported texts previously thought lost, annotations that challenged accepted histories, and volumes whose provenance remained uncertain. Scholars encountered unique insights into historical events, artistic developments, and scientific discoveries, often uncovering connections that had eluded conventional archives. Marginalia, underlined passages, and carefully preserved personal notes revealed the collector's influence on the archive, documenting preferences, priorities, and perhaps even hints of a broader vision that had guided acquisitions. Each visit offered revelations, yet the mystery persisted. For every manuscript studied, several remained hidden, their contents and significance unknown, waiting silently behind locked doors. Even with some manuscripts revealed, rumours persist of hidden wings, locked rooms, and documents whose significance might yet redefine understanding of the past. Legends circulate among collectors, scholars, and historians about volumes that contain undiscovered scientific observations, early literary drafts, or rare insights into events considered lost to history. The combination of isolation, meticulous preservation, and selective access has created an aura of intrigue that surrounds the library, suggesting that the full scope of its knowledge has yet to be appreciated. Curiosity persists because the archive exists in the tension between what is known and what remains unseen, a repository of human intellect and obsession alike. Behind fortified doors and guarded corridors, another trove of unseen manuscripts lies waiting, its contents quietly defying the reach of the outside world. The flooded monastery library under lake waters. Aware that the rising waters would swallow centuries of accumulated knowledge, the monks worked tirelessly to safeguard manuscripts, scrolls, and rare books from impending inundation. Each day brought urgent calculations of what could be saved, and which texts were most critical to preserve the monastery's intellectual legacy. Local law suggests that some monks undertook secret journeys to nearby settlements to hide the most valuable volumes, while others crafted waterproof containers to house fragile parchments. Their efforts combined devotion, foresight, and an understanding of the fragility of knowledge, revealing a community determined to outwit the forces of nature and time. Wooden chests, waxed bundles, and stone-lined compartments were assembled hastily, yet with careful attention, designed to endure both water and time. The containers were sealed with pitch and layered in straw, ensuring that even if submerged, the manuscripts would remain partially protected. Monastic records describe the use of stone alcoves in cellars, deliberately chosen for their natural insulation and relative dryness, reflecting an intuitive grasp of preservation techniques long before modern archival science. Every chest, bundle, or compartment carried a precise inventory, noting not only the contents, but also annotations on condition and significance, creating a careful map of intellectual treasures in an environment where water could not be fully controlled. Illuminated texts chronicled local history, religious rituals, and philosophical discourse, while rare treatises on medicine, astronomy, and law reflected the breadth of monastic scholarship. Some volumes contained diagrams of astronomical observations, maps of trade routes, or herbal remedies, illustrating the monastery's role as a hub of practical and theoretical knowledge. Hand-painted illustrations adorned certain manuscripts, preserving artistic styles of the period alongside written content, making the library both a repository of information and a canvas of visual culture. Even as water threatened to obliterate these works, the monks recognized their value, carefully selecting items that represented the diversity and depth of centuries of study. When the lake waters rose, many manuscripts were lost to silt, currents, and decay, leaving only fragments to hint at the knowledge once held within the monastery walls. Archaeologists later noted that waterlogged pages fused or warped, ink leached into surrounding fibres, and binding materials disintegrated, creating puzzles that challenged even the most patient restorers. Yet, signs of human care persisted. Bundles were stacked in neat layers, some partially submerged but intact, suggesting that the monks' foresight had succeeded more often than failure would allow. The very presence of these remnants transforms the lakebed into a silent library, a testament to both ambition and the inevitability of loss. Diving teams equipped with cutting-edge sonar and submersible tools retrieved submerged texts, carefully treating each fragment to halt deterioration and reveal hidden inscriptions. Controlled lifts from the lakebed allowed conservators to stabilize fragile manuscripts with gentle desalinization and chemical treatments, restoring legibility to inks and pigments. Each recovered volume became a bridge to the past, offering scholars an opportunity to explore the monastery's intellectual landscape long after its physical structures had been overtaken by water. The combination of modern technology and meticulous craftsmanship allowed for discoveries that the monks themselves could scarcely have imagined. Even partially waterlogged, the manuscripts provide clues to monastic life, agricultural practices, and trade networks, illuminating the intellectual and practical world of a vanished community. One fragment revealed calculations for water management in nearby fields, while another detailed the composition of herbal remedies used to treat local populations. Marginal notes, often brief but precise, offered glimpses into the decision-making and teaching practices within the monastery, suggesting a community deeply engaged with both its environment and the broader currents of knowledge. The lake, once a destructive force, became a preserver of history, adding layers of narrative through damage and survival. Some manuscripts are accompanied by drawings, travel notes, and annotations that reveal the monks' engagement with other religious centres and scholarly networks across Europe. These artefacts demonstrate a sophisticated awareness of global intellectual currents, including references to far-flung monasteries, trade in exotic materials, and the exchange of medical or astronomical knowledge. Certain pages include sketches of distant landscapes or diagrams of mechanical devices, illustrating how observation and creativity intertwined with scholarship. Such items hint at an interconnected world, where even a remote monastery participated in the circulation of ideas, now suspended beneath the still waters of the lake. Many sections of the Submerged library remain untouched beneath layers of sediment, their contents a tantalizing secret awaiting discovery. Archaeologists and divers have recovered only fragments of what is believed to be a much larger archive, with speculation suggesting that additional chests, bundles, and compartments lie hidden in deeper or more treacherous areas of the lake. The obscured corners, where sediment accumulates most densely, may conceal manuscripts that could dramatically alter understanding of monastic life, regional history, or lost arts of science and literature. Each dive raises questions that remain unanswered, sustaining a sense of anticipation and uncertainty that has persisted for decades. The flooded monastery endures not only as a ruin beneath the lake, but as a testament to the lengths humans will go to preserve knowledge, and the fragility of even the most carefully safeguarded wisdom. Its submerged library embodies both triumph and loss. Human foresight preserved what could be, while water and time claimed what could not. Scholars, divers, and historians continue to piece together fragments, reconstructing a past that exists simultaneously in memory, water, and ink-stained parchment. The monastery's legacy is neither fully known nor fully lost, suspended in the interplay of human endeavour and the enduring unpredictability of nature. Beneath the dark waters, manuscripts whisper through the silt, waiting for hands brave enough to uncover the secrets that time and tide have concealed. The Cold War Bunker Bookstore. Constructed beneath layers of reinforced concrete and earth, the bunker was designed to protect not only people but ideas deemed too dangerous for the outside world. Built during the height of Cold War tensions, its subterranean corridors were intended as both a refuge from potential nuclear fallout and a vault for information that could influence ideological battles. Planners and engineers meticulously designed the complex to withstand shock, flooding, and intrusion, creating an environment where human lives and knowledge could survive in parallel, sealed away from prying eyes and the unpredictable currents of geopolitics. As political tensions intensified, officials quietly converted chambers into shelves of literature, transforming corridors of survival into an archive of forbidden thought. Civil servants and select librarians catalogued materials that range from suppressed philosophical treatises to contraband scientific research, while corners were arranged to hold politically sensitive works that could not be publicly accessed without severe consequences. The bunker's adaptation reflected both the paranoia and the reverence for knowledge characteristic of the era, where preserving certain ideas became as critical as safeguarding food, water, or shelter for those entrusted with the collection. Stacks of propaganda leaflets, underground pamphlets, and censored scientific journals lined the walls, each volume a testament to the fraught intellectual battles of the era. Among the shelves were translated works of dissident writers from across Europe, manuscripts analysing nuclear strategy, and anthologies of political philosophy considered subversive by the ruling authorities. Technical manuals and reports on emerging technologies, from early computing to chemical synthesis, were stored alongside ideological tracts, highlighting the intersection of knowledge, power, and control. The diversity of the collection reflected not only what regimes feared, but also what generations of thinkers had created in quiet rebellion against censorship. Steel doors, hidden locks, and coded access protocols ensured that only a select few could navigate the maze of subterranean shelves. Guards, cryptographic key holders, and specialized librarians maintained strict routines, verifying credentials and monitoring the movement of materials with vigilance born of necessity. Surveillance systems, acoustic sensors, and contingency plans created an atmosphere of constant, quiet tension, where the act of retrieving a single book required careful coordination. Even the lighting and ventilation were calibrated to preserve both human safety and the longevity of the texts, reflecting a dual concern for survival and scholarship. Librarians and archivists assigned to the bunker often lived in rotation on site, their days and nights devoted to monitoring, cataloguing, and safeguarding each text as if the fate of nations depended upon it. Shifts were carefully scheduled to ensure constant oversight, with teams rotating every few days to manage the delicate balance between rest and vigilance, while simultaneously maintaining the secrecy of the operation. Climate control systems were meticulously monitored to preserve paper, bindings, and ink in a space designed to resist extremes of temperature and humidity, a task made more urgent by the remote and underground nature of the bunker. Custodians created detailed records of the collection, cross-referencing sensitive works and annotating volumes, with notes intended to guide future scholars who might inherit these hidden archives. Each annotation carried dual significance: practical guidance for handling fragile materials and subtle warnings about the political risks associated with particular texts. In this environment, the responsibility weighed heavily, as mistakes could imperil both the preservation of knowledge and the safety of those entrusted with it, demanding a rare combination of discipline, discretion, and unwavering dedication. Decades later, explorers and archivists stumbled upon forgotten keys and maps, slowly revealing a trove of ideas that had been intended for concealment. Initial expeditions were cautious, cataloguing surviving works while documenting the layout of the bunker for future study. Some rooms remained untouched, sealed with layers of concrete and rusted steel, and required delicate excavation to access without damaging the fragile texts inside. Archival teams encountered manuscripts with annotations, marginalia, and physical modifications, notes made by previous custodians to highlight importance, correct errors, or protect the identity of authors whose works could not safely circulate in public life. Among the recovered documents were treatises on nuclear strategy, forbidden literature from dissident writers, and scientific experiments never publicly disclosed. Some volumes contained detailed diagrams of missile trajectories and contingency planning, while others explored revolutionary ideas in sociology, psychology, or philosophy, suppressed by dominant regimes. Annotated pamphlets provided insight into underground publishing networks and smuggling operations, demonstrating the lengths to which intellectual communities went to preserve dialogue in the shadow of political repression. Collectively, these materials offered a window into a world where knowledge itself had become a form of resistance, carefully curated and zealously protected. Portions of the bunker remained sealed, their contents known only through fragmented notes, leaving historians to wonder at what lies beneath the earth. Rumours persist of entire wings containing propaganda from both sides of ideological divides, unexamined scientific manuscripts, and rare periodicals that may challenge modern understanding of Cold War thought. Sediment, corrosion, and the passage of time have rendered some areas practically inaccessible, leaving questions of what was lost and what survives tantalizingly unresolved. Each attempt to breach these sealed rooms is an exercise in both historical inquiry and patient calculation, with the potential for new revelations at every corner. Personal notebooks, letters, and diaries tucked between official volumes reveal the human side of the Cold War, from fears of censorship to small acts of rebellion preserved in ink and paper. These documents record the meticulous tracking of deliveries, coded correspondence between trusted colleagues, and reflections on the political climate that shaped every decision within the bunker. Marginal notes sometimes hint at quiet defiance or personal concern, capturing moments of doubt, courage, and the weight of responsibility carried by those maintaining the archive. Together, these writings illuminate the lives of the people behind the preservation of knowledge, showing that the bunker was not only a repository of texts, but also a silent witness to the hidden personal histories of those who lived and laboured in its shadows. The Cold War bunker bookstore exists as a monument to both fear and curiosity, where the desire to control information collided with the relentless human urge to preserve it. Its underground corridors embody the paradox of concealment and discovery. The same walls that kept knowledge from the public also ensured its survival for those daring enough to uncover it decades later. Scholars and historians continue to navigate its maze-like interior, piecing together fragments that speak to the political, technological, and intellectual currents of an era defined by secrecy, suspicion, and the silent power of the written word. Buried under concrete and decades of concealment, the books endure, quietly guarding knowledge that time nearly forgot. The desert nomad camel-carried library. Desert nomads carried knowledge across vast distances, ensuring that the written word could survive where cities could not. For centuries, families and clans who traversed the arid expanses of the Sahara developed a method of safeguarding texts that combined practicality with reverence, treating books as precious cargo alongside water, food, and the camels that bore them. These mobile libraries were not merely repositories, they were lifelines of culture, connecting isolated settlements and oases to a wider world of intellectual and spiritual exchange. Preservation and survival were inseparable, and each caravan became a vessel of memory against the erasing forces of time and environment. Leather satchels, waxed bundles, and wooden chests were secured atop camels, designed to withstand wind, sandstorms, and the relentless heat of the dunes. Manuscripts were wrapped carefully in layers of cloth to prevent abrasion and moisture damage, with occasional applications of natural resins or oils to stave off decay. Every detail of transport mattered. Books were packed to balance the load across the animals, tied with ropes that allowed for gentle suspension, and placed in positions that minimized jostling during long marches. These precautions reflect a sophisticated understanding of materials and conditions, a combination of knowledge, patience, and respect for the fragile nature of written works in a harsh climate. Before setting out on long journeys, nomads performed careful rituals to inspect and maintain each manuscript, treating the texts as sacred companions on the road. Fragile pages were gently cleaned, bindings reinforced, and delicate scrolls rewrapped in cloth to protect against sand and sudden gusts of wind. Some manuscripts bore inscriptions of protective prayers or talismans, intended to shield both the contents and the bearer from misfortune during the arduous journey. Techniques for preservation were practical as well as symbolic. Waxed covers repelled moisture, leather straps secured bundles against shifting during travel, and careful placement atop camels ensured stability across uneven terrain. In this meticulous preparation, the act of safeguarding knowledge became a daily practice of devotion, blending cultural reverence with the tangible challenges of life in the desert. Inside these portable libraries were treatises on astronomy, poetry from distant courts, medicinal recipes, and sacred texts passed down for generations. Some manuscripts traced the movements of stars across the desert sky, guiding both navigation and ritual calendars, while others contained verses from long-forgotten poets whose words survived only because of these itinerant carriers. Medical texts documented remedies derived from local herbs and plants, a compendium of survival knowledge encoded in ink and parchment. Each work held both practical value and symbolic weight, marking a continuity of culture that transcended the impermanence of temporary encampments and shifting sands. The caravan routes themselves became conduits of culture, linking remote oases, desert settlements, and distant kingdoms through the movement of manuscripts. Traders and nomads established informal networks, exchanging books alongside goods such as salt, dates, and textiles, creating a flow of ideas that would have been impossible for urban centres alone to sustain. Some manuscripts were copied in secret along these routes, while others were lent or gifted between clans, allowing intellectual currents to travel across hundreds of miles, connecting communities whose histories might otherwise have remained isolated. the desert became both a medium and a messenger, carrying knowledge as faithfully as it transported grain or water. Travelling alongside caravans, itinerant scholars and scribes contributed to the flow of knowledge, adding, copying and annotating texts along the way. As the desert stretched endlessly around them, these mobile intellectuals documented local observations, from seasonal shifts to regional customs, and carefully transcribed manuscripts to ensure that texts reached new owners intact. Marginal commentary was added to clarify complex ideas or provide guidance for future readers, creating layers of interpretation that transformed each manuscript into a living record. Historical accounts of itinerant scribes in desert regions show that such practices allowed knowledge to travel across vast distances, preserving ideas that might otherwise have been lost and fostering networks of intellectual collaboration that linked distant communities. In this way, the camel-borne libraries functioned not as static collections but as dynamic, evolving repositories of human thought. Sandstorms, bandits, and scorching days claimed many manuscripts, leaving only fragments to hint at the full scope of what had once traversed the desert. Pages were eroded by grit, ink faded under the relentless sun, and entire volumes vanished into dunes or were lost during forced relocations. Raiders sometimes seized camels and their precious loads, scattering books across the sands or destroying them as warnings. Even with careful preparation, the fragility of these mobile libraries was a constant threat, and the survival of any manuscript was often a testament to luck as much as skill. The desert demanded vigilance, and every safe arrival at an oasis was a small triumph for knowledge. What survived these journeys offers insight into a world where mobility preserved wisdom, and survival depended as much on safeguarding ideas as it did on water and food. Contemporary scholars examining the remnants of these nomadic collections have found rare treatises on desert navigation, hand-copied poetry with annotations indicating local dialects, and scientific observations of flora and fauna that were otherwise unrecorded. The contents reflect a blend of necessity, ingenuity, and cultural curiosity, knowledge adapted for life on the move, preserved by communities whose primary concern was not scholarship for its own sake, but the endurance of collective memory against the impermanence of their own environment. Archaeologists, historians, and rare book scholars now trace fragments through private collections and hidden caches, piecing together knowledge scattered by centuries of desert travel. Field studies have uncovered manuscripts tucked away in abandoned tents, secret storerooms within isolated settlements, and even beneath sand-drifted encampments long since abandoned. Each discovery requires careful cataloguing and conservation, as centuries of exposure leave many texts brittle and delicate. Scholars must navigate local traditions, oral histories, and physical remnants simultaneously, reconstructing roots, ownership, and purpose from minimal clues. The process transforms fragments into narratives that reveal the scope and resilience of nomadic intellectual life. Countless manuscripts may still lie buried beneath dunes, their contents known only to the desert winds and the nomads who once bore them across endless sands. Some volumes, rumoured to contain detailed maps, forgotten rituals, or early scientific observations, could shift our understanding of regional history and desert cultures. Others may record personal reflections, accounts of survival, or lost artistic compositions, silent witnesses to centuries of human endeavour and memory. The mystery persists because the desert is both harsh and vast, concealing what it carries and testing the endurance of those who seek to uncover its secrets. Beyond the horizon, the desert holds its secrets, and buried within its sands, knowledge waits for those who dare to seek it. The hidden university library in a totalitarian regime. Within the locked halls of the state-controlled university, entire collections of banned texts were tucked away, their existence known to only a few daring scholars. In an era when ideological conformity was enforced by law, these hidden volumes represented a quiet rebellion, a means of preserving knowledge and ideas that authorities sought to erase. Scholars who maintained access treated the library as both a sanctuary and a risk, aware that every text was a potential threat to their safety, yet believing that intellectual preservation was a responsibility that outweighed fear. The presence of these clandestine collections demonstrated that even under strict oversight, human curiosity and determination could persist in silence. False panels, hidden staircases, and locked cabinets allowed faculty to maintain discreet custody of manuscripts that official censors had outlawed. Some shelves were constructed behind sliding walls, their contents invisible to routine inspections, while other materials were stored beneath floorboards in reinforced compartments designed to resist discovery. The very architecture of the library reflected dual purpose: outward compliance and inward defiance, with physical spaces engineered to protect ideas as much as the students and scholars who safeguarded them. Keys, codes, and secret hand signals became part of daily practice, transforming the act of entering a reading room into a ritual of careful navigation and trust. Philosophical treatises, revolutionary histories, and banned literature were catalogued in shadow, some annotated by students and professors who risked their freedom to preserve ideas. Works by political philosophers, suppressed historians, and controversial novelists were meticulously copied and maintained, with footnotes and personal commentaries added in margins to guide future readers. Scientific texts that conflicted with the prevailing doctrine were often hidden alongside literary works, revealing a dedication to preserving the breadth of human thought, not only ideas deemed politically safe. In this context, the library was less a static repository than a living testament to intellectual resilience. Detailed records of the concealed books were maintained in private ledgers, often encoded with symbols or abbreviations intelligible only to the custodians. Librarians and professors devised intricate cataloguing systems to track manuscripts without alerting authorities, using cross-referenced margins, hidden indexes, and subtle annotations to indicate content, provenance, or risk. Some ledgers employed colour codes, shorthand, or seemingly innocuous markings that masked the true value of the works, allowing future scholars to navigate the collection safely. These methods reflected both a rigorous intellectual discipline and the constant necessity of secrecy, demonstrating that the preservation of forbidden knowledge depended as much on careful organisation as on physical concealment. Professors with reputations for dissent carefully guided access, mentoring students in the clandestine study of works that could invite punishment if discovered. Apprenticeship in secrecy was as important as the content of the books themselves, as each scholar learned to read, copy, and circulate knowledge without attracting attention. Letters and notes were sometimes exchanged in code, and discreet meetings in secluded corners of the campus provided opportunities for discussion. The act of teaching in this environment was inseparable from the art of concealment, and knowledge was valued both for its content and the courage required to preserve it. Lectures and study sessions were sometimes held in private quarters, where professors imparted knowledge without leaving a trace on official records. Forbidden texts were read aloud, debated, and copied by hand, while students memorized key passages to ensure that ideas could survive even if manuscripts were confiscated. Oral transmission became a crucial method of preservation, allowing knowledge to move beyond the university walls and into the hands of trusted allies. Accounts from surviving scholars reveal that these covert gatherings often involved meticulous planning, coded language, and layered explanations to protect both the material and the participants, demonstrating the ingenuity and courage required to maintain intellectual life under constant surveillance. Inspections, informants, and sudden raids meant that every visit carried the threat of confiscation, interrogation, or exile, forcing scholars to perfect the art of discretion. Libraries could be searched without warning, and entire collections risked destruction if found in violation of ideological mandates. Scholars developed elaborate contingency plans. Manuscripts were sometimes hidden in plain sight, disguised as administrative files, while others were smuggled off-site to private residences or trusted acquaintances. The precariousness of this intellectual survival added a tension to everyday life, as the preservation of knowledge depended on vigilance, cunning, and the unspoken loyalty of those who understood its importance. Manuscripts were painstakingly copied by hand or concealed in personal belongings, ensuring that even if originals were seized, their contents could survive. Students and faculty alike participated in the meticulous work of transcription, sometimes labouring through nights by candlelight to replicate entire volumes. These copies were distributed selectively, often carried in leather satchels or hidden beneath ordinary items, ensuring that the knowledge travelled beyond the university walls. This system of replication functioned as both insurance and resistance, allowing ideas to persist across generations despite the omnipresent threat of censorship. Recent archival research and interviews with surviving professors have begun to reveal the extent of the university's secret holdings, tracing the routes by which banned ideas persisted. Scholars have located catalogues listing forbidden works, discovered marginal notes revealing how students interacted with controversial texts, and identified architectural modifications made to protect valuable manuscripts. Each discovery underscores the scale of the effort required to preserve intellectual life under authoritarian rule, and hints at a network of collaboration that existed in plain sight, yet remained invisible to most authorities. The ongoing investigation into these collections continues to reshape our understanding of scholarly perseverance in oppressive contexts. Countless manuscripts may still lie concealed beneath the university's floors or behind walls, built to obey authority, their contents waiting for eyes willing to risk discovery. Some volumes may hold insights into political thought suppressed for decades, experimental scientific observations lost to textbooks of orthodoxy, or literary works that were never meant to be published. Each hidden manuscript represents a fragment of human thought deliberately shielded from power, a testament to the enduring need to preserve knowledge, even in the most controlled and dangerous circumstances. The library, in its secrecy, continues to echo with the unspoken stories of those who guarded it, a silent archive of defiance and intellect. Within the silent corridors, knowledge long forbidden rests in obscurity, poised to reveal itself to those daring enough to seek it. The Shipwrecked Library on the remote island. Far from the bustling ports and trade routes of its time, a merchant vessel once carried a peculiar cargo through the unpredictable waters of the South Pacific. A ship laden not only with silk and spices, but also with hundreds of bound volumes, journals, and manuscripts. These were not ordinary books, but compilations of rare knowledge, meticulously gathered by collectors, scholars, and explorers who had travelled across continents to acquire them. The vessel's course was intended to connect distant islands and colonial outposts, carrying knowledge as much as commerce, yet fate intervened in the form of a violent storm that tore through the ship's hull and drove it upon jagged, uncharted reefs. Locals in the nearby islands would later recount legends of strange drifting pages washing ashore, though the wreck itself remained submerged and largely forgotten for centuries. Under the crushing weight of the sea, the ship's wooden frame held firm, its interior slowly transforming into a hidden repository of forgotten knowledge. Waterlogged pages swirled in currents, yet many survived, compressed in cargo crates and protected by the fortuitous placement of heavier items like lead-bound tomes and metal-bound journals. Marine biologists and historians studying similar wrecks have documented how anaerobic conditions underwater can preserve organic material far longer than expected, especially in temperate zones with minimal oxygen and low bacterial activity. In the case of this library, the relative seclusion of the reef and the cold, dark waters created a near-perfect preservation chamber, albeit one that was completely inaccessible to human eyes for generations. When divers first stumbled upon the wreck centuries later, they were guided not by maps or records, for no official logs indicated the precise location, but by fragments of oral histories passed down among island communities. These stories spoke of a floating trove of books, described with reverence and caution, and the diver who located it reported a peculiar sensation upon approach, as if the water itself held a memory of the knowledge entombed below. Crates filled with manuscripts were discovered wedged between the ribs of the shattered hull, some partially open, their pages swollen and ink smudged, yet remarkably legible in parts. Among them were journals chronicling merchant voyages across the Indian Ocean, treatises on natural philosophy, handwritten translations of classical texts, and even personal letters between scholars, many never published or known elsewhere. The manuscripts revealed more than content. They offered a glimpse into the networks of intellectual exchange that had existed long before modern communications. One leather-bound journal described the methods a collector used to trace rare botanical illustrations from one port to another, noting not only the location of the specimens, but also the names of the scholars who had sketched them. Another codex, its edges frayed and corners stained by seawater, contained meticulous astronomical observations recorded by a navigator en route from Java to the islands near Papua New Guinea, including diagrams of stars and constellations that corroborated historical accounts of pre-modern navigation techniques. These discoveries offered both historical insight and an eerie sense of continuity, connecting voices separated by centuries, all trapped together beneath the ocean's surface. Retrieving the volumes required careful planning. Divers employed specially designed lifting bags and underwater crates to prevent the already fragile manuscripts from disintegrating, and conservation teams worked in controlled environments to halt further decay. When examined in laboratories, researchers found that the ink of certain documents had been fortified with natural compounds like iron gall, which partially resisted water damage, while some paper contained fibres from mulberry or hemp, materials known for their durability. These facts suggested that those who had compiled the collection had anticipated long journeys and harsh conditions, underscoring the human foresight behind the library's creation. In this sense, the shipwreck was not simply a casualty of a storm, but an inadvertent protector of human knowledge, preserving it through an accident of circumstance. The shipwreck library's mystery extends beyond its contents, residing as much in its isolation as in the texts themselves. Even after rediscovery, many volumes remained inaccessible, locked in sections of the wreck too fragile or dangerous for divers to explore. Some crates had slipped deeper into the sand and coral, becoming part of the reef itself, growing roots of marine life around them, while others had fractured, their fragments scattered across the seafloor. Scholars speculated that entire collections of early navigational charts, ethnographic accounts, and philosophical treatises might lie forever buried, beyond the reach of modern technology. The uncertainty of what remained, coupled with the stories inscribed within the recovered works, created an almost tangible tension, a sense that the ocean held secrets far greater than those it had reluctantly revealed. Even on land, the island closest to the wreck maintained an aura of quiet reverence. Fishermen reported that when storms approached, fragments of paper could still be seen drifting in shallow waters, delicate sheets etched with characters in unfamiliar scripts, sometimes half buried in sand, stuck in the roots of mangrove trees. Anthropologists visiting the island noted that local oral traditions had preserved not only the legend of the lost library, but also cryptic advice about how it should be approached, passed down as warnings and hints, suggesting a collective memory of knowledge too valuable to lose. These stories aligned with historical accounts of other merchant ships whose cargoes of rare books were intentionally kept secret or poorly recorded to prevent theft, showing that the phenomenon was not unique, though it was remarkable in its preservation underwater. Aspects of the vessel's journey have been reconstructed by researchers, drawing on surviving shipping manifests and trade records from ports as far-flung as Batavia, Manila, and Port Louis. These records hint at the intentions behind the library's assembly, to create a circulating collection of knowledge that could be shared among colonial administrators, scholars, and private collectors who often risked piracy, political unrest, and natural hazards to obtain such works. Each recovered manuscript, therefore, represents a fragment not only of human intellect, but also of the perilous trade networks that made intellectual exchange possible in the pre-modern world. Every torn page and water-stained illustration serves as a reminder that knowledge, once thought fragile and transient, can survive in the most improbable circumstances. In the laboratory, conservators discovered peculiar annotations in the margins of several manuscripts, suggesting that the original owners had used these books as working texts rather than ornamental objects. Diagrams of trade routes, botanical sketches marked with precise measurements, and marginal calculations of astronomical observations all indicated active engagement with the material, a tactile interaction that connected the reader to the content across centuries. The library was not simply a collection, it was a dialogue, frozen in time beneath the waves, now resumed through the careful work of modern hands. At present, portions of the library are preserved in controlled archives, digitized to ensure wider access, while the bulk of the wreck remains undisturbed, a submerged monument to human curiosity and resilience. The ocean has claimed much of it, yet in doing so, it has also protected a fragile record of human endeavour, allowing voices of the past to emerge with their questions, insights, and observations still resonating in the present. The mystery of what lies further in the deep, however, has never been fully resolved, leaving scholars and divers alike with a sense of awe and apprehension. The remnants of the library lie along the reef, buried under coral and sand, their pages carrying whispers from centuries past. The vault of alchemical and occult texts in a forgotten European castle. Whispers of forbidden knowledge travelled in hushed tones among scholars and merchants, stories of a collection hidden so carefully that few could even confirm its existence. Tales of alchemical formulas, coded manuscripts, and mystical treatises were spoken of only in secrecy, carried in letters, marginal notes, and private journals, often obliquely, to avoid attracting unwanted attention from authorities or inquisitors. The texts were said to record experiments on metals, celestial alignments, and potions, blending what we now call science with superstition, and the mere suggestion of their survival centuries later fueled both awe and caution among those who sought them. Locked behind layers of deception, coded messages, and misleading records, the vault was designed to be discovered only by those considered worthy or daring enough to risk its secrets. The castle's keepers intentionally misdirected visitors and chroniclers, creating false ledgers and secret passageways to confound intruders. During the height of the Enlightenment, when curiosity about natural philosophy and chemistry was spreading rapidly through Europe, these volumes were carefully hidden to protect their contents from political scrutiny and the zealous moral policing of the Church. Historians have documented similar practices in noble estates across the continent, where manuscripts on alchemy or astrology were treated as highly sensitive commodities, often guarded with codes, locks, and even the threat of imprisonment. Within the castle's concealed dungeons, stacks of manuscripts, vellum scrolls, and notebooks lay in shadowed silence, their covers etched with symbols meant to confound any casual observer. Iron clasps and chains, some still rusted to the walls after centuries of neglect, secured the most delicate volumes, while piles of parchment rested on stone shelves, darkened by damp and time. Among the collection were treatises on the transmutation of metals, notebooks detailing distillation processes, and hand-drawn illustrations of intricate apparatus, including retorts and alembics, demonstrating how medieval alchemists approached chemistry through experimentation. Some scrolls contained cryptic languages or invented alphabets, while others were written in Latin or early German script, preserving a record of knowledge that had survived wars, plagues, and political upheaval. Some texts outlined experiments in metallurgy, while others traced the movements of planets and stars with painstaking precision, suggesting that the castle's alchemists were also astronomers. Marginalia noted dates, lunar cycles, and planetary alignments, hinting at attempts to synchronize chemical reactions with celestial phenomena. Early chemists believed that such alignment influenced the success of experiments, an idea documented in other surviving alchemical manuscripts and now verified as a recurring theme in historical accounts. One leather-bound folio detailed the refinement of mercury and lead, illustrating processes that were precursors to modern laboratory techniques, while another presented a sequence of cryptic diagrams depicting the philosopher's stone, the legendary substance said to transmute base metals into gold. Generations of alchemists, clerics, and scholars had contributed to the collection, annotating experiments, correcting errors, and occasionally encoding their work to hide it from prying eyes. Historians examining similar archives have noted how early practitioners often used personal codes or invisible ink to ensure only trusted apprentices could interpret their findings. In the castle vault, the handwriting changed from one manuscript to another, some carefully printed and others scrawled in hurried script, reflecting centuries of continuous use. Notes in the margins occasionally referenced distant libraries, trade networks for rare minerals, or fellow scholars who had tested similar experiments elsewhere in Europe, hinting at an intellectual network that extended far beyond the stone walls of the castle. Close inspection of marginalia revealed cryptic formulas, herbal recipes, and star charts, evidence that knowledge once considered forbidden was tested and recorded in real time. Botanicals noted in the margins correspond to species used historically in medicinal alchemy, such as valerian, mandrake, and wormwood, while diagrams of planetary positions align with historical astronomical records. These details suggest that the vault's occupants were both methodical and experimental, observing patterns, measuring results, and occasionally documenting failure alongside success. One notebook detailed a failed attempt to extract silver from lead, with careful observations about temperature, reaction times, and purification techniques, illustrating that trial and error was as central to alchemy as the pursuit of mystical transformation. Only a fraction of the vault has been catalogued, and some chambers remain untouched, preserving centuries of mystery around the texts. Modern scholars have focused on the manuscripts most accessible to them, digitizing pages and translating content for historical analysis, yet many volumes remain chained to shelves or hidden behind false walls. Security measures, whether medieval or accidental through neglect, have preserved these works from looters and inquisitors alike, creating a time capsule in stone. The combination of deliberate secrecy and fortuitous preservation has allowed the vault to survive intact long enough for contemporary researchers to glimpse its layered complexity. While some volumes have been studied and reproduced, the largest mysteries remain buried within the shadowed corners of the dungeon. The manuscripts suggest knowledge once considered heretical or dangerous, including early chemical experiments, mystical philosophy, and cosmological theories, yet the true scope of the collection may never be known. Among the more intriguing artifacts were small apparatus and metal implements, traces of experiments, and fragments of annotations hinting at ideas that were never fully recorded or widely circulated. This juxtaposition of practical experimentation and mystical speculation creates a sense of unease and fascination, as if the keepers of the vault were testing boundaries we're still only beginning to understand. The castle itself, now partially in ruins, still evokes the deliberate secrecy that protected the texts for centuries. Stone corridors echo with silence, and the occasional gust of wind rattles broken shutters, reminding visitors that the building has endured wars, fires, and decades of abandonment. Archaeological studies of similar European castles show that hidden chambers, false floors, and concealed stairways were common methods of securing valuable knowledge, particularly in the context of alchemy, early chemistry, and occult studies. The vault, therefore, is both a product of human ingenuity and a repository of human curiosity, preserved through careful planning and sometimes through sheer accident. In the deepest recesses of the castle, the most secret manuscripts rest, their knowledge quietly awaiting the first daring hand to turn a page. The mountain monastery's underground manuscript vault in the Himalayas. In whispered chants and silent study, the monks treated every word as a living force, believing that wisdom itself demanded guardianship and reverence. Knowledge was not merely read but honoured, each text a bridge between human understanding and the transcendental, carrying both sacred teachings and practical instruction. Stories passed down among travelling scholars spoke of a repository so carefully preserved that generations of monks risked perilous climbs and harsh winters to ensure its survival. Within the monastery, this duty became both spiritual discipline and daily labour, an unbroken chain linking centuries of devotion to the physical manuscripts entrusted to their care. Each manuscript was enveloped in treated fabrics and natural coatings, a protective ritual designed to endure the biting cold and dry mountain air. Paper crafted from local hemp bark or mulberry fibres was coated in varnishes derived from plant resins, while handwritten inks blended soot, water and animal glue, a formula selected to resist fading over decades. Some volumes were further wrapped in yak hide covers or linen cloths, sometimes tied with hand-woven cords, ensuring that even the fiercest Himalayan storms could not easily claim their contents. The effort was deliberate and systematic, reflecting an intimate knowledge of both materials and the mountain climate, revealing that preservation itself was considered a sacred practice as much as the texts they shielded. The design of the subterranean chambers leveraged natural insulation, with thick stone walls maintaining a near-constant temperature and humidity, while carefully placed ventilation shafts allowed air to circulate without exposing the manuscripts to harsh winds. The combination of altitude, dry air, and seasonal temperature fluctuations slowed decay, discouraged insects, and limited mold growth, turning the vault into a natural conservatory. Monks understood these conditions through observation and experience, positioning manuscripts in recessed niches or slightly elevated shelves to further protect them, a silent partnership between human ingenuity and the mountain environment. A hidden stairwell spiraled downward from the temple floors, leading to an intricate lattice of chambers where the texts rested in careful stillness. Constructed beneath the meditation halls, the underground repository was neither grand nor ostentatious but practical, cool, dry and secure. Stone shelves carved directly from the mountain rock held manuscripts in tightly organised sequences, some arranged by subject, others by the date of transcription, revealing centuries of monastic cataloguing practices. Small alcoves contained fragile bundles tied with ribbons, and occasional niches displayed ritual objects, suggesting that preservation was interwoven with devotional observance, with monks performing prayers and offerings to honour both knowledge and the sacred space that housed it. Centuries of Tibetan and Sanskrit knowledge filled the repository, capturing teachings on celestial movements, medicinal herbs, and ethical philosophy that had journeyed across valleys and passes. Some texts contained commentaries on Buddhist sutras, explaining metaphysical concepts alongside practical guidance for monastic life. Others were treatises on astrology or astronomy, detailing planetary alignments crucial for ceremonial timing and agricultural planning. Medical scrolls included remedies for altitude sickness, frostbite, and endemic illnesses, reflecting careful observation of the harsh environment and the ways human physiology responded to it. Many of these works were unique, copied meticulously by hand after arduous journeys, making the monastery a rare hub of cultural transmission in the high Himalayas. Monks often embarked on arduous pilgrimages to acquire rare works, carrying fragile manuscripts through narrow mountain passes and treacherous snowfields, sometimes for weeks at a time. Each text was carefully wrapped in layers of cloth or placed in lightweight wooden boxes with the addition of herbs or natural oils to deter moisture and pests during the journey. Along the way, they would exchange knowledge with other monasteries, copying select passages or receiving annotated versions from travelling scholars, creating a fragile yet resilient network that ensured the survival of rare treatises across the Himalayan region. At the first light, scribes bent over ink-stained pages, their movements deliberate and ritualistic, transcribing centuries of accumulated insight with unwavering attention. Each stroke of the quill was practiced as both prayer and precision work, ensuring clarity and accuracy for future generations. Margins were filled with notes on experiments, botanical observations, or celestial events, while symbols and diagrams conveyed complex ideas that words alone could not capture. Some monks specialised in preserving difficult texts, while others copied newly acquired manuscripts brought by travelling scholars. The labour was repetitive but sacred, forming a rhythm that mirrored the chanting of prayers, the rising of the sun, and the passage of seasons, connecting the physical work of writing to the spiritual life of the monastery. Faded diagrams charted the stars, meticulous notes described remedies for ailments at extreme altitudes, and layered commentaries merged empirical observation with spiritual guidance, offering insight into a worldview in which knowledge and faith were inseparable. Certain scrolls described intricate rituals for harmonizing mind, body, and environment, blending philosophical principles with botanical and astronomical observations. Others recorded rare medicinal compounds derived from mountain flora, some still studied by modern ethnobotanists for their practical applications. The combination of empirical practice and mystical reasoning demonstrates that the monastery was not merely a centre of religious devotion, but also a hub of early scientific observation, where theory and experiment were inseparable and preserved with the utmost care. Researchers allowed brief glimpses into partially sealed rooms where centuries-old writings lingered beyond reach, their contents described in notes and sketches but largely untouched by modern hands. Efforts to catalogue and digitise these texts have been painstaking and incomplete, due in part to the fragile condition of the manuscripts and the extreme altitude at which the monastery sits. Even when accessible, some texts remain encoded in obscure scripts or shorthand developed by monks for security, translating into a painstaking process. Photographs and scans capture only fragments, while oral accounts from resident monks provide the most complete understanding of what remains hidden, underscoring that much of the vault's knowledge continues to exist beyond direct human access. Deep within the stone labyrinth, untouched manuscripts lie in profound silence, sheltering truths that time has refused to reveal. The hidden library in a decommissioned prison complex. Corridors once echoing with the clatter of keys and footsteps now lie silent, yet behind heavy doors, a collection of books and papers has endured the neglect of decades. The walls, scarred by peeling paint and rusted bars, speak of confinement and control, yet within the shadowed rooms, knowledge has quietly resisted erasure. Dust motes swirl in shafts of light that filter through barred windows, illuminating shelves bowed under the weight of volumes long ignored, their survival a paradoxical testament to the resilience of ideas even in a place designed to suppress them. In a long-forgotten wing, shelves sag under the weight of manuals, journals and reports, some stacked haphazardly, others meticulously arranged, as though the original caretakers anticipated the indifference of future decades. Faded labels hint at the organisation of the library, with sections devoted to penal law, rehabilitation techniques, and general education, while forgotten ledgers record the circulation of books by the few who once had access. The air carries the faint tang of ink, mildew, and rusted metal, a reminder that preservation here has been accidental, a byproduct of dry cell blocks and the absence of human interference rather than deliberate care. Across the 19th and 20th centuries, correctional institutions often maintained libraries intended to educate, reform, and occupy inmates, ranging from legal references to classical literature and treatises on penal theory. Administrators believed that exposure to knowledge could promote moral development, reduce recidivism, and instill discipline, while educators introduced lessons in literacy, arithmetic, and philosophy to a population largely excluded from formal learning. The library in this complex reflected those ambitions, containing texts on ethical reform, religious instruction, vocational manuals, and even essays advocating changes to prison policy, representing a neglected chapter in the history of penal innovation. Among the surviving works are hand-bound ledgers detailing early prison regulations, medical journals recording inmate health, and reformist essays advocating humane treatment, all reflecting a forgotten history of institutional thought. Some volumes contain meticulous observations on diet, exercise, and work routines, revealing the efforts of reformers to balance punishment with well-being. Others offer literary exercises or philosophical inquiries composed by prisoners themselves, their handwritten notes and marginalia adding layers of personal reflection to official doctrine. In certain cases, textbooks from local schools or public libraries were retained, indicating that the institution sought to provide instruction that extended beyond mere survival, even in confinement. Prison clerks, educators, and occasionally inmates themselves contributed annotations, corrections, or copied texts by hand, leaving traces of effort and curiosity in a place defined by restriction. Faint pencil marks in margins hint at questions, corrections, or attempts at analysis, while doodles and sketches suggest moments of imagination within the monotony of incarceration. Certain volumes show signs of repair, with worn pages reinforced by scraps of discarded paper, revealing that human attention, even fleeting, played a crucial role in sustaining knowledge against the slow degradation of time and environment. These small acts of care, often invisible to official records, speak to the quiet persistence of intellectual life where it was least expected. Among the shelves, one finds a surprising variety of materials beyond standard books: ledgers tracking inmate behaviour, pamphlets on industrial labour programmes, correspondence with reform committees, and even trial transcripts meticulously organised for reference. Each item reflects the intersection of administration, education, and daily prison life, illustrating how record-keeping was both practical and ideological. Certain volumes reveal experimental rehabilitation schemes, such as literacy programs or vocational training, while others include moral instruction manuals that once guided both guards and prisoners. The diversity of these materials highlights the layered purpose of the library: part archive, part educational tool, and part repository of institutional memory, a space where knowledge and oversight intertwined in ways rarely appreciated outside the walls of the prison. Despite water damage, peeling paint, and rusting metal shelves, some volumes remain remarkably intact, a testament to durable bindings, dry interior conditions, and the occasional intervention of staff or inmates. Books on law and rehabilitation, bound in thick leather, have survived decades of neglect, while paperbacks and periodicals show the slow encroachment of decay. Historical photographs suggest that the library was once well stocked and regularly maintained, but as the prison closed and attention waned, the collections were abandoned to the elements. The contrast between the intended purpose of confinement and the enduring vitality of knowledge highlights the resilience of human effort and the unforeseen ways in which information can persist. Monks of another era might have revered the texts in a distant monastery, yet here in the prison, human devotion took the form of quiet, routine maintenance, a different kind of sacred duty. Staff members occasionally dusted shelves, recorded inventory, or repaired bindings, actions performed not for spiritual merit but practical necessity, yet these gestures preserved volumes that might otherwise have crumbled to dust. Occasionally, prisoners themselves treated certain books with care, respecting their authority as repositories of learning, and in some cases, used them to teach others, fostering brief moments of intellectual freedom within an environment otherwise defined by control. Entire aisles of uncatalogued books, forgotten legal texts, and notes suggesting prisoner-authored experiments in literature and philosophy have been described by researchers venturing into the abandoned complex. They report journals filled with observations about daily life in confinement, drafts of essays on social reform, and correspondence with external organisations advocating for penal improvements. Many shelves remain untouched, the accumulation of years of indifference leaving a landscape of layered knowledge that is as tantalising as it is incomplete. Attempts to digitise or catalogue these materials are ongoing, but the sheer volume, fragility and historical complexity present formidable challenges, ensuring that much of the library's contents remain enigmatic. Though weighed down by rusted gates and surrounded by emptied cells, the hidden library endures as a paradox where learning continues even in decay. Its books and manuscripts testify not only to the history of penal theory and reform, but also to the unforeseen ways that knowledge can survive when abandoned. As scholars continue to probe these spaces, the library offers a rare glimpse into the intersection of human restriction, intellectual persistence, and the fragile but enduring nature of recorded thought. In the dim, silent cells, manuscripts remain in obscurity, their insights imprisoned between shadowed walls and the years that pass above them. The deserted research station library in Antarctica. The wind howled across the frozen plateau, carrying snow that scraped against the walls of the deserted research station, while inside rows of books lay untouched for decades. The air was brittle and still, carrying the faint tang of old paper and ink that had endured decades of isolation. Ice-coated windows filtered a pale, diffused light across sagging shelves, casting long shadows over notebooks and journals that had once guided scientists through months of relentless cold. In this landscape of silence, the library seemed less a human construction and more a relic of frozen time, a repository where knowledge had been suspended in the harshest conditions on Earth. Shelves bowed under accumulated dust and frost, and scattered papers bore the faint scent of ink preserved by the extreme cold, a fragile testament to human presence long since vanished. Some volumes leaned precariously, others remained upright as if frozen in place by circumstance, while the floors were littered with fragments of charts and annotations, displaced by shifting ice and settling timbers. The smell of kerosene from old lamps lingered faintly in corners, a reminder of the station's former inhabitants who laboured in isolation, preserving knowledge even as the continent's storms raged beyond the walls. Every object hinted at both the endurance and vulnerability of human effort in a land where survival itself was an ongoing challenge. Throughout the 20th century, polar stations served as hubs for meteorological observation, glaciology studies, and oceanographic research, their libraries containing meticulously kept logs, field journals, and scientific manuals vital to survival and study in extreme conditions. Expeditions from multiple nations brought with them collections of specialized texts, ranging from maps of sea ice and compasses for navigation to treatises on snow accumulation and animal tracking. Station libraries were carefully curated for utility. Reference works on navigation, physics, and chemistry coexisted with survival guides and emergency protocols, all designed to provide the knowledge necessary to sustain life in one of the world's harshest and most isolated environments. Handwritten journals detailed months-long observations of wind patterns, ice movements, and animal populations, while charts and notebooks recorded experimental procedures, inventories of supplies, and even personal reflections of researchers enduring isolation. Margins were filled with notes on equipment maintenance, chemical reactions, and weather anomalies, revealing a meticulous attention to detail that balanced scientific inquiry with practical survival. Some journals documented interactions with wildlife, from penguin colonies to seals, providing ecological observations that remain valuable to modern biologists. Each page offered a glimpse into the routines, challenges, and quiet perseverance of those who lived and worked on the icy continent, turning the library into a record not just of data, but of human endurance. Expedition members often worked by candlelight or kerosene lamps, carefully recording observations in books designed to withstand sub-zero temperatures sometimes encasing pages in wax or oilcloth to prevent moisture damage. Instruments were calibrated by hand, chemical experiments were adapted to the frigid environment, and delicate observational sketches were executed despite the limitations of gloves and frostbitten fingers. The care taken in maintaining these records reflected an awareness of their long-term importance, not only to immediate research, but also to the broader history of polar science. Each entry was an act of preservation, ensuring that knowledge could survive beyond the lifetimes of those who braved the isolation and danger of Antarctica. The design and construction of the station itself aided the preservation of these works, with interior spaces insulated against harsh winds and extreme fluctuations in temperature, while windows and walls minimized direct exposure to snow and ice. Cold, dry air acted as a natural preservative, slowing the decomposition of paper and ink, while carefully maintained heating systems in certain rooms prevented condensation that could have destroyed delicate manuscripts. Even in areas where pipes had burst or walls had warped under frost pressure, many volumes remained legible, a testament to both human foresight and the accidental conservation provided by the environment itself. The interplay of architecture, climate, and human intervention created a library uniquely preserved by both ingenuity and circumstance. Some texts bore evidence of repeated handling, smudged ink, and worn bindings, suggesting they were consulted frequently during the station's active years, while others remained untouched, their pages crisp and inscriptions pristine. Expedition logs detailed not only scientific data, but also mundane aspects of daily life: meal schedules, morale reports, and maintenance records, providing an unexpected window into the routines of individuals living at the edge of the world. Diaries reveal how the monotony of isolation was punctuated by observations of auroras, ice formations, and the shifting behavior of wildlife, blending empirical record-keeping with moments of personal reflection and awe at the frozen landscape surrounding the station. The environmental extremes imposed strict limits on human activity, yet the researchers' commitment ensured that the library became a comprehensive archive of polar knowledge. Equipment manuals, navigation charts, and meteorological tables were maintained with precision, while experimental records in glaciology, atmospheric chemistry, and oceanography were meticulously updated. When power failures or storms forced researchers into inactivity, many turned to the library itself, reading, annotating, or revising notes, a quiet continuity of study that transformed the station into a living archive, even amid the desolation. Scientists and historians who have visited the abandoned station describe aisles of notebooks, weather charts, and unpublished research offering unique insight into decades of polar study, while much remains inaccessible under frozen debris. Attempts to recover and catalogue these materials are ongoing but hampered by logistical challenges: ice accumulation, structural instability, and the extreme remoteness of the station. Even when volumes can be retrieved, fragile bindings and brittle paper require careful handling, emphasizing that the knowledge preserved here is both irreplaceable and exceptionally vulnerable. Each discovery carries the weight of decades of isolation, offering a silent testament to human determination and the enduring value of recorded observation. Shrouded in frost and silence, this library is more than a repository of scientific records. It is a monument to the endurance of human curiosity and meticulous effort in the face of relentless adversity. Its books and manuscripts testify not only to the ambition of polar research, but also to how extreme environments shape the survival of knowledge itself. As researchers continue to uncover what remains, the station's library offers a window into a world where intellectual pursuit, environmental extremity, and the passage of time converge in frozen harmony. Suspended in a world of ice and quiet, knowledge endures, impervious to the passing ages. The vault of lost maps and charts beneath an abandoned lighthouse. Storm-tossed cliffs rise from the restless sea, and atop them stands a lighthouse whose light has long since gone out, guarding not only treacherous waters, but also secrets hidden in its foundations. Waves crash against jagged rocks below, and the wind carries a chill that cuts through the air with relentless force, a constant reminder of the dangers that once demanded the lighthouse's vigilance. Within its weathered walls, the sense of abandonment is almost palpable, yet the building conceals more than its crumbling masonry. Concealed beneath its floorboards and behind false panels lies a collection of knowledge that has survived centuries of storms, neglect, and human oversight. A narrow hatch at the base of the spiral staircase reveals stone steps descending into darkness, where the smell of salt, mildew, and ink hangs over shelves long forgotten. The stairwell itself creaks under the weight of years, as though protesting the intrusion of curious feet into a domain that has not felt human presence for decades. Candles or flashlights reveal aisles of maps rolled into tubes, flattened charts layered on tables, and boxes containing logbooks annotated by generations of coastal surveyors. Each object is fragile, yet the very darkness that concealed them has also preserved their contents, offering a paradoxical sense of safety within the shadowed vault. From the 17th century onward, coastal lighthouses often doubled as hubs for navigation, storing charts of shipping lanes, hazard maps, and notes from surveyors documenting reefs and shifting sandbars. Mariners relied on these carefully maintained collections to guide ships safely past treacherous rocks, shifting shoals and hidden coves, while keepers of the records meticulously updated maps with new observations, corrections, and annotations. Many charts also tracked tidal movements, seasonal currents, and ice formations, providing vital information for vessels that dared the unpredictable seas. In some cases, private merchants or naval officers contributed maps detailing trade routes or patrol patterns, further enriching the vault with knowledge intended for survival, commerce, and strategic advantage. On low tables and stacked along walls lie hand-drawn maps, ink-stained logs, and meticulously annotated charts showing currents, tides, and uncharted coves, each a record of voyages long vanished. Some maps depict islands that have disappeared beneath shifting sands or tides, while others indicate ports whose names have faded from modern records. Margins are filled with notes on navigational calculations, sketches of coastal landmarks, and reminders of hazards such as reefs, whirlpools, or submerged rocks. The precision of these records speaks to the painstaking labour required to chart the ever-changing seascape, a task both scientific and survivalist, where error could mean disaster for passing ships. Lighthouse keepers and coastal surveyors risked storms, cliffs, and isolation to maintain these records, often copying or correcting older maps to prevent shipwrecks, leaving traces of labour that reveal both dedication and urgency. Many kept journals detailing near misses at sea, miscalculations in earlier charts, or personal accounts of surviving violent gales, giving the maps an unexpected human dimension. The men and women who tended both light and ledger understood that the survival of knowledge was inseparable from the survival of life itself, and their meticulous care ensured that future travellers could navigate waters that had claimed countless vessels. In quiet moments between storms, keepers and cartographers measured distances with dividers, recorded bearings with compasses, and sketched coastlines using lead pencils and ink, carefully noting shifting sands and submerged rocks. Some kept small field notebooks to cross-reference tidal data and weather conditions, while others annotated errors discovered during voyages or from reports by passing sailors. Coastal surveyors sometimes made corrections directly on rolled charts or layered new sheets atop older ones to preserve previous observations, demonstrating a meticulous attention to accuracy under difficult and often dangerous circumstances. The combination of practical navigational skills and painstaking record-keeping ensured that these maps remained reliable guides for mariners long after the keepers themselves had disappeared, embedding human knowledge directly into the contours of the charts. Salt-laden air, damp stone walls, and occasional flooding threatened these records, yet many maps remain remarkably legible, protected by waxed sheeting, leather tubes, or the simple neglect that kept them hidden from the world. Some volumes display faint watermarks from previous inundations, ink blurred in places yet still decipherable, offering glimpses into centuries of observation and recording. In other instances, maps were layered with sheets of parchment to shield delicate ink, or folded and tied for compact storage, a practical approach that has inadvertently preserved their legibility. The precarious state of the vault reflects both the fragility and resilience of human knowledge when subjected to the forces of nature. Depicted on certain charts are islands erased from official records, or shorelines transformed by time and tide, offering tantalizing hints of voyages never fully documented, mysteries that intertwine human curiosity with the perils of the sea. Certain volumes record paths of exploratory expeditions that disappeared from history, while others contain annotations suggesting encounters with uncharted shoals or reefs too dangerous to approach. Scholars speculate that a few maps may even reference trade routes used for smuggling or clandestine navigation, providing a subtle and shadowy layer to the vault's contents. Each chart invites questions about voyages, discoveries, and secrets that may have been deliberately obscured or forgotten over time. Navigating the narrow stairwell, researchers find aisles stacked with unsigned logs, marginalia hinting at clandestine trade routes, and charts that could rewrite portions of maritime history, yet much remains unstudied and at risk of decay. Some volumes, brittle with age, have frayed edges or pages warped by intermittent moisture, while others remain pristine, their ink seemingly immune to time. Researchers must move carefully, aware that a single misstep could damage centuries of labour, and yet the allure of undiscovered information drives continued exploration. Even partially restored or catalogued, the collection remains a labyrinth of knowledge, where the line between historical fact and forgotten lore blurs amid the shadows. Within the lighthouse, time itself seems to slow as visitors trace the meticulous work of generations of surveyors and keepers, a legacy encoded in ink and parchment, resilient against neglect and the relentless passage of waves. The vault embodies the intersection of human curiosity, maritime necessity, and environmental challenge, where knowledge has been protected not by walls alone, but by its obscurity and the inhospitable nature of the surrounding cliffs. Each map, log, and chart tells a story of vigilance, of observation made in moments when failure could mean disaster, and of the quiet dedication that ensured the survival of information across centuries. Inside the shuttered beacon, in the silence between crashing waves, secrets of the sea await those brave enough to uncover them.